Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Should be a great late night conversation. I'm glad that I'm here with you all. Should be great. So, yeah, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, tweet this out, bring all your friends. Let's have a good conversation.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with how we do things here on this stream, I tend to give some opening remarks. While I'm giving them, I'm keeping track of the super chats, the Rumble rants, the Rockfin tips that are coming in. And then I do a roll call after my opening remarks are done, where we find out who's on the other side of the camera, who is watching this. And it's always great. We have such a wide audience here, a lot of different people watching these streams. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions or your Rumble rant questions or your Rockfin questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, send me a Rockfin tip, a Rumble rant, or a super chat, and I will make a point of answering it. That's how it will go. So I see that there's a few people in the Rumble right now. I see that there's a couple people in the Rockfin, and then the majority of the crowd is here on YouTube. Yeah, we're just going to have a great late night conversation. There we go. Yeah, so I hope everyone's enjoying it. It's starting to be autumn here in New York City. And you're on the list, Dan. Don't worry. It's starting to be autumn here in New York City. And so it's a little chillier. It's a little darker. It was unforgivably and amazingly hot here for a while. And now it seems that we're in autumn. So, my body has been getting those autumn drowsiness. I've been waking up every morning and doing that thing where I put my hands up in the air to stretch out for posture, try to hold my arms up in the air. Tomorrow, I'm going to make a point, unless I have to go into the city, which I don't think I should have to do tomorrow. If I don't have to go into the city, if work doesn't, call me into the city or whatnot, if I'm working from home mainly tomorrow, I will make a point. I am committing to go to the gym tomorrow because that'll wake my body up, give me that jolt, that wake up, which is important, especially when you're working from home, because you can get into that lazy malaise of working from home, and you don't want to get into that malaise. You want to jolt your body awake. And when it's a little bit chilly, your body wants to calm down. And so I'll have to jolt my body awake, do a nice, good hour on the treadmill. That would be very, very good for my body, I think. Give me the awakeness and get me used to the change in temperature. And then from there, I can do my thing. So, yeah, I understand there's the second Republican debate is happening tonight. I didn't watch it. Haven't watched it. I think it's probably still going at this point. I see people in the chat saying that the second Republican debate was pretty hard to stomach. I did watch a great deal of this.
We want, instead of economic nationalism, you have ultra left-wing globalism. They hate our country. And the workers of America are getting, to put it very nicely, screwed. You're getting screwed.
Yeah, I watched a lot of Donald Trump's speech to the auto workers, which I had no idea was happening. I knew that Joe Biden did his photo op on the picket line, which to be honest, as much as I'm not an AOC fan, she does have a point. Barack Obama said that if American workers were ever out on strike, he would walk the picket line with them, and he didn't. And in particular, in 2011, when the Wisconsin workers were occupying the state capitol building in Wisconsin in order to oppose the anti-union legislation, the fact that Barack Obama remained silent throughout all that was a devastating blow to the labor movement. If Barack Obama had just gotten his ass to Wisconsin, it would have really been a game changer in politics. And Barack Obama really let the workers down. So the fact that Biden did actually fulfill his promise and he said he was going to walk the picket lines with workers, and he did, even though Joe Biden's a shitty president in many, many ways. At least he's in enough political trouble as a president. He felt compelled to fulfill his promise, his campaign promise, and actually show up and be on the picket lines. That says something. But tonight, Donald Trump absolutely blew him out of the water. Joe Biden did a little photo op, said, "I love unions," shook some hands and laughed. Donald Trump, he gave an economic nationalist, make America great again, populist speech to a group of auto workers in Michigan. Look, let's be honest, okay? We don't have to look at this. We're not here to stump for Trump or let's be real. All the polls show that the United Auto Workers, the Auto Workers Union, has the backing of the public overwhelmingly. 75% of Americans support the auto workers in their strike against the auto manufacturers. 75%. So any politician, any serious presidential candidate who's not going out on the picket line to support the auto workers is a fool. There's just no way around that. So, Donald Trump doing what he did, I'm not saying it's great, it's proof that Donald Trump is a great moral individual, but it also shows that, just like Biden felt compelled to fulfill his campaign promise, it appears that Biden or that Trump had the same inclination. I do want to recommend a book, right? Hold on. There we go. I want to recommend a book. This is really one of the best labor history books I have ever read. It's by Roger Kieran. Roger Kieran, he wrote The Communist Party and the Auto Workers Unions by Roger Kieran. This is a really, really good book, and it goes over the history of the Communist Party USA, how they built auto workers unions before the United Auto Workers, before the UAW, how they led the sit-down strikes, how they were involved, how they were forced out by federal law. They passed a federal law that no Communist Party member can hold ranks in labor unions. This is a really, really good history. So if you want to learn the history of how we got good paying jobs at Chrysler and General Motors and Ford, I would recommend reading Roger Kieran's very, very good history, The Communist Party and the Auto Workers Unions. I read this book, I think in 2011. I read this book because I bought it. It was on sale at a bookstore here in New York City, and I didn't know what I was buying. That is a really, really good book. Roger Kieran is a pretty good writer. He's from the Communist Party, but I think he was expelled for ultra-leftism. He's one of these people that's been around the Communist Party's milieu for a long time. For a while, I think he was trying to start his own group, the National Council of Communist Clubs or something, but he's a professor. He's an academic, but he's from a working class background. He's from, I think, Milwaukee or Minnesota or someplace like that. He grew up on a farm. And Roger Kieran, any of his lectures you can find online are very, very good. So I wanted to recommend that in light of the auto workers strike. And then, again, part of the rhetoric that is missing, and this is just the logical fallacy that I hear in so much of the economic nationalist rhetoric of Trump and Steve Bannon and others, is that they seem to believe that there's like this magic that jobs in steel mills, jobs in auto plants, jobs in meat packing facilities just magically have better wages than fast food jobs, than Uber drivers, etc. Magic, right? It just, is magic. And they never talk about the fact that at one point, steel workers and auto manufacturers and meat packers and textile workers, at one point, workers in industry in the United States made very low wages. And it's only because of the Communist Party and the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Now it's the AFL-CIO. That's but it used to be there were two labor federations, the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, and then there was the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO. You're on the list. And the CIO was aligned with the Communist Party and with Roosevelt. And in Roosevelt's second term, they unionized the steel industry, the auto industry, and it was like a war. And then after World War II, because they had unionized those industries, they launched the post-World War II strike wave, and that is when those jobs became very good paying jobs. That's when the wages of steel workers and auto workers and others shot up. But until then, the workers in those industries were not paid very good wages. And just to get basic union representation in those jobs, people died. And nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. So I just, that's really important. And that you can't talk, and they make it sound like, like fast food workers, those jobs just magically have lower pay or something like that. And they don't get that it was a struggle to get auto workers the decent pay and benefits, and that, fast food workers, Walmart workers, retail workers, workers on, in the Amazon warehouses, they could also get decent wages. And the bosses, the owners of McDonald's, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, the owner of Walmart, the Walton family, they could pay the workers in those industries what auto workers make. They don't, because those industries have no unions, and there is no danger of the workers shutting down the plant or occupying the store to get it. And that, with a militant labor movement, you could indeed have a situation where Jeff Bezos was forced to pay those Amazon drivers and those Amazon warehouse workers what auto workers makes. He makes billions of dollars and he could afford it. But there's not a labor movement to force that. And that is one of the frustrating things about so much of the economic nationalist conversation is you don't get the history of the Flint sit-down strike. You don't get the history of the strike wave of 1934. You don't get the history of militant labor struggles being the reason that workers in these industries that have good unions, that have good wages, that they have what they have. And that is an important part of the conversation that really only communists and only revolutionaries and socialists that we can give to the conversation. The woke left, they'll never talk about that because they hate workers, right? If you talk about workers' rights, that's class reductionism, right? If you talk about bringing people together, they hate those UAW workers. Probably, 75% of the public supports the UAW workers. The 25% who don't are breadtube fans. The 25% who don't work for Jacobin, right? Because, they think all those workers are a bunch of racist, sexist Trump supporters. I'll never forget how in West Virginia, when the West Virginia teachers strike happened, the Workers' World Party, a Marxist party that was dominated, that went woke, didn't support the teachers. And, it put a statement on their website that said the teachers of West Virginia should pay reparations instead of going on strike, and one settler, one bullet. And, that obviously wasn't the position of the party. But when the Detroit wing of the Workers' World Party called out the young woke kids in West Virginia for doing that, the party leadership didn't come down on the woke kids. It came down on the Detroit branch and eventually expelled Detroit from the party, because that's how ridiculous the woke people are. The woke people don't support the auto workers. And look at the video. A lot of those auto workers are Trump supporters, because Trump is talking a line against the establishment, and Joe Biden is the establishment. And electric cars are not popular with auto workers. Now, if you haven't had a chance to go and watch, I would recommend that you go and watch the great conversation I had with a Center for Political Innovation member, Tom Michalak, who is himself an auto worker at Chrysler. And we had a great conversation about this strike, and we're probably going to have a follow-up conversation very soon as the strike progresses, especially in light of the Biden and Trump speech. So there we go. Oh, this is quite a question here. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely answer that, NRJ. You're on the list for sure. A lot to clear up there, some confusion, but that's okay. That's why you got to ask questions. You never want to create an atmosphere where people are afraid to ask questions, right? You never want to create that kind of atmosphere, because there's a whole lot of bluffing in Marxist circles right now. When I first went around Marxist circles, everybody I heard, the first time I went into those Marxist bookstores, everyone's talking about the contradiction, the contradiction, the contradiction. I had no idea what they meant. And it wasn't until years later when I studied Hegel that I understood they were referring to the Hegelian dialectic. I had no idea, but I can guarantee you these people didn't know either. When you create an atmosphere where people are afraid to ask questions, right? When people are afraid to ask questions, when people are afraid to say, what does this mean? That's a nightmare. And honestly, a lot of the people that I hear going around talking all this, all this Marxist jargon about materialism and dialectics and the contradiction of they don't know what they're talking about. And if you stop them and you point at them and say, what does that mean? They can't answer your question. Well, I can. And I work hard to be able to explain everything I talk about. I try never to say anything on these streams that I cannot explain, that I cannot justify. There's no bluffing here. There's no attempts to prove to you that I'm some kind of academic, right? I am not a college professor. I am an organizer. I am a reporter. I am a revolutionary agitator. I am an anti-imperialist, and I am here to give you my understanding of the truth, my understanding of history, my understanding of world events, and that's what I'm here to do. So NRJ, thank you for that great question, and I will give you an answer. Absolutely, absolutely I will. So stay tuned for the second half of the show. You are on the list, NRJ. Speaking of which, shout out to John McCarthy. John McCarthy sent me this great clip of Tulsi Gabbard today. I love Tulsi Gabbard in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, we can be critical of her. She's certainly not a communist, but she has been very outspoken in her opposition to regime change wars. As a military veteran herself and active duty, she's currently in the U.S. military. And this clip of her speaking and talking about cancel culture, this is just beautiful. I just loved this clip of Tulsi Gabbard. Go ahead, Tulsi.
You know people in your own lives who feel this fear because of their power. It's understandable to be afraid of what others might think of us, given the power they have to smear our character, for speaking the truth. It's natural for us to not want to be labeled as bigots. But in those moments of fear, in those moments of doubt, it's important that we ask ourselves, what are we actually really afraid of? Who are we trying to please? Is it the party boss? Is it your neighbor? Is it your friend? Is it some anonymous person on Twitter saying toxic and horrible things? Because the reality is, whoever we are trying to please, that is who we serve. That's our master. So it allows us the opportunity to ask ourselves, are we here to please some person, or are we here in this world to do our best to please God? God, who is truly our best friend. God who we know, without a doubt, loves us unconditionally and eternally. We can't serve two masters. God gives us free will to make this choice for ourselves, to decide what is our purpose in life, who are we here to serve, and how will we spend this precious, limited amount of time that we have in our lives.
Yeah, that was a great clip of Tulsi Gabbard. And I got to say, Tulsi Gabbard, when she speaks, she's got a military background. She's a very focused person. Sometimes she can be a little robotic in the way she speaks. Like she's just kind of, she's just kind of making the points. However, you'll notice that whenever Tulsi Gabbard starts talking about God, her eyes kind of light up. And you can tell that she means every word that she is saying. She absolutely does believe in God with every ounce of her being. And her religious background is fascinating, by the way. Her father is from Samoa. Many people think that she's Indian because of her religion, but she's not. Her father is from the U.S. territory of American Samoa. And her father was recruited into the Hare Krishna movement, which is a particularly fanatical brand of Hinduism that was imported to the United States during the Cold War by the CIA. And it started blossoming among college students and leftists. But, the kind of people who might become communists would convert to this religion called Hare Krishnaism. Or there was something called the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Her father converted to that and then moved to Hawaii because there was a white dude. There's a white guy, I forget his name, who joined in the 1970s. He joined the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, but he had a disagreement with the founder of it, who was from India. So this white dude broke away and formed his own wing of Hare Krishnaism, and it's based in Hawaii. That is who Tulsi Gabbard follows. That is Tulsi Gabbard's religious background. And I got to say, this is like a recurring theme on these streams, right? Is that, Tulsi Gabbard is not a communist by any means, but she is illiberal, right? Her background is that she grew up as a very devout Hindu and a particular brand of Hinduism called, Hare Krishnaism. Which George Harrison of the Beatles also converted to that, right? I guess the Hare Krishna movement, my understanding is that it is a religious sect in India. Krishna is one of the deities. Hinduism is a polytheistic religion. However, they do believe that all the deities have, one common origin. Well, the Hare Krishna movement is a group, is a kind of a spin-off of Hinduism that are very, very devout. And they believe that they kind of take the polytheism into a monotheistic direction. They believe that there really is only one God. It just has different faces. And they also believe that the most holy kind of person is a person who goes around saying God's name all day long. And that's why I'll see them in the subways in New York City. You'll see them, and they'll just be standing there, and they'll be banging on drums and chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And that's why George Harrison, he had a song, I forget what it's called, but I forget, he had a song where he just kind of repeated the name of Jesus and Hare Krishna and stuff. And that is a religious sect from India. And they are very anti-communist, and they are very right-wing, and they were supported by American intelligence as a barrier against communism in India and in the United States. The Congress for Cultural, yes, My Sweet Lord, that's the name of the song, which he was sued for. A whole nother story. George Harrison apparently plagiarized that song from another song, and that's a wild story. But this was a group that was kind of propped up by American intelligence against communism, but it's an illiberal organization. They have arranged marriages. They're very against homosexuality and abortion. And, they're a very fanatical religious sect. And Tulsi Gabbard comes out of that. And that has put her at odds with the liberal order. And that is why she's anti-war, right? That her religious sect has ties to the government of Modi in India, which is a government that was very critical of the U.S. regime change operation in Syria. That's a government that is more friendly with Russia than the United States would like. You're on the list. You're on the list. And, so because of that, Tulsi Gabbard, somebody from a right-wing, religious background that is illiberal, that is in the U.S. military, has become the voice of anti-imperialism, and that she doesn't believe in all this free market stuff, because free market stuff, that's called market liberalism or neoliberalism, right? So it's very wild, and we got to pay attention to this. I really want people to realize the Cold War is over. The Cold War is over. Let me repeat this one more time. The Cold War is over. And the political compass that developed during the Cold War is broken. And if you're following the political compass of the Cold War, you're lost. You are absolutely lost, because that is not the time that we are living in. That is not the time that we're living in. And, we're living in a period that's much closer to the 1930s in its politics. We're living in the period of a prolonged capitalist economic crisis in which there are intense divisions in the ruling class. And we are living in a period where every movement and every ideology is being split down the middle. And I keep making this point. Over and over and over again. And if you've watched these streams lately, you've heard me say it, but I must say it. And I say it in speeches, and I say it to people that I know. And I try to get people to understand this. This is a thing. This is a level of political understanding that is very, very, very important. I've laid out my analysis of the period we're living in. Where is America going? Marxism, MAGA, and the coming revolution. In the lead up to the Second World War, every ideology got split down the middle. Every ideology. In Britain, the far right wing had a guy leading it named Oswald Mosley. Oswald Mosley was the leader of the British Union of Fascists. He was an admirer of Hitler. He was from a wealthy family, and he was ultra-masculine, and he was conservative, and he started this group called the Black Shirts, and they were Nazi sympathizers, and they were young men who lived together and exercised together and went around beating up communists, and they were this right-wing goon squad that he started of young British nationalist, anti-Semitic young men or whatever. Well, Oswald Mosley was an admirer of Hitler. So what happened in the lead up to World War II? In Britain, the British government that didn't like Hitler started their own right-wing movement of young men who lived together and exercised together and were ultra-patriotic and nationalist that was against Hitler. And it was called the Oxford Group. It later became known as Moral Rearmament. And if you looked at the two groups, they looked exactly the same. Bunch of young men that are buff because they exercise all the time, marching around with, the Union Jack, the British Empire, UK flag. They looked exactly the same, but they were on opposite sides. One side supported Hitler. That was the Black Shirts. That was Oswald Mosley. The other side, the Oxford Group, which sounded about the same, ultra-patriotic, ultra-Christian, ultra-nationalist, and all of that, they waved the same flag. They were on the other side. They had the same ideology, more or less, English nationalism, religion, masculinity, or whatever, but they were on the opposite side. And in communism, we saw this divide, right? If you went to the convention of the Socialist Workers' Party, you went to the convention of the Communist Party, you would hear roughly the same thing. Support the workers against the bosses, build the unions, uphold the legacy of Marx and Lenin, class struggle. However, the Communist Party supported Roosevelt and Stalin and was really against Hitler. And the Trotskyites were against Roosevelt. They thought he was a class collaborationist, Bonapartist traitor. They were against Stalin. They thought he had abandoned the revolution. And they most likely got some funding from Japan and from Hitler. And during World War II, the Trotskyites tried to unionize the army and disrupt the war effort. These are two groups that believed in the exact same ideology, Marxist-Leninist communism, but one group was on one side and one group was on the other side. And let me add, in New York City, Harlem is the capital of Black America. Right? Harlem, they say 125th Street is the most important street in Black America. That's where the Apollo Theater is. That's where, Adam Clayton Powell, his office was. And, that's a very important street. Well, in Harlem during the 1930s, there was a big mass movement called the Nation of Islam. And they were followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And they were very much against Roosevelt. And they were very much against the Communist Party because they thought the Communist Party was taking advantage of their struggle and using it for their own ends. And they believed that Japan was not an enemy of Black people. They were pretty clearly on one side during World War II, and they told their members not to go if they were drafted. Many Nation of Islam members went to jail during World War II. They were on one side. However, there was then Father Divine. Go and read about Father Divine. Father Divine was a Black minister from the South, and he was leading a movement of Black people, had kind of a messianic vision. He was leading a movement of Black people to fight for their rights, but he loved the Communist Party, and he loved Roosevelt, and he loved Stalin. Same worldview, Black freedom, Black liberation, but interpreting it to be on another side. This is what is happening to every ideology in our time. This is what you need to understand, okay? In the lead up to World War II, you shouldn't have been asking, is somebody right-wing? Is somebody a conservative? You should have been asking, if you were in England in World War II, you shouldn't have been asking, is somebody a conservative? Is someone an English nationalist? You should have said, are they with the Oxford Group and Frank Buckman, or are they with Oswald Mosley? If they were with the Oxford Group and Frank Buckman, they were good. If they were with Oswald Mosley, they were not good, right? Again, in the United States, you shouldn't have asked, are you a communist? Because if someone was with the Communist Party, they were good. But if somebody was a Trotskyist, they were not good, right? And that there are many, many examples of this. Every ideology got split down the middle between where you stood on the existing issues. And that is what is happening right now. The libertarians are split down the middle. The Republicans are split down the middle. The socialists and the communists and the leftists are split down the middle. And I am at the point where things are getting so serious right now. We have to get beyond the LARPing. Because if you're LARPing, and if you're imagining that you're your favorite communist hero from history, you're not going to get this. You're not going to understand this. This is going to throw you for a loop, right? But the political compass is broken. We're in a period where there's divisions in the ruling class, and the ruling class, the different factions, are recruiting foot soldiers from very different ideological wings. And that is what we need to understand. There are some libertarians that I can work with. Angela McCurdle, awesome, right? Awesome. Mises Caucus, awesome. That's wild. I hate Ludwig von Mises and everything he stood for. I am the biggest critical of Ludwig von Mises. But when it comes to libertarians, the ones who want peace with Russia and peace with China and want to free Julian Assange and don't want World War III and are trying to call out the Restrict Act and protect our civil liberties, they're called the Mises Caucus. And the ones who don't want that are not the Mises Caucus. And, Republicans, right? The Republicans who want World War III with Russia and want, a confrontation, the Republicans, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, the neocons, they're not the good ones. But the people in the MAGA camp, I might strongly disagree with their worldview, but they're against sending weapons to Russia, or to Ukraine to fight Russia. They're against the emerging police state. They're angry about all their members being thrown in jail on January 6th. You have to understand it this way. The question is not what your ideology is. Anyone can say they believe in anything. right? I could come out here and I could say I'm a Buddhist and I want to free Julian Assange, and I'd be on the right side. And I could come out here and say I am an ancient Greek esoteric pessimist and I want to throw Julian Assange in jail, and I would be wrong, right? There are ways of interpreting different ideologies to mean different things, right? It is a matter of emphasis, right? And I'm not trying to be a relativist. I am a Marxist, and I draw heavily from Marxism. But as I admit, there are things about Marxism that I reject. I do believe in God, and we already have a super chat about idealism and materialism and all of that, and we'll be getting into that later. So I'll leave that for the second half. There are things about Marxism that I'm critical of, and I realize that there are certain weaknesses inherent in what you call the left tradition that have enabled the George Soros woke pro-imperialist left to take over and conquer so much of the left. And I understand that. And that's what I've spent my career studying. That's what City Builders and Vandals is about. That's what, I get into it in this book, Where is America Going? I spent a long time understanding the Marxism that is the foundation of my belief and the anti-imperialism that is the foundation of my belief, and understanding how that has led to Russia and China breaking free from Western domination and lifting themselves up, how it's led to countries across Latin America and Africa breaking free and lifting themselves up, but how it has also been very easily distorted and confused to lead to the color revolutions of Eastern Europe. Those were all done with leftist, activist-sounding people that overthrew socialist governments, George Soros, and to lead to the woke degrowth nonsense that we see today, right? This is one ideology, but it divided. And I think the Stalin-Trotsky split was the fundamental beginning of that divide. Trotsky represented the revolutionary intelligentsia and the lust for permanent revolution and destruction. And Stalin, who grew up in a small town in Georgia, who went to seminary school, who brought the Russian Orthodox Church back, and who rejected the theory of permanent revolution and instead mobilized the country to build. I think that Stalin represented the beginning of the type of socialism that exists around the world today, in China, in Vietnam, in many different countries, right? That is my argument. And that is the thesis upon which I have founded the Center for Political Innovation. But I'm trying to get you to understand that if you're going to be relevant in real politics, you need to understand where people stand. Freeing Julian Assange puts you on the right side. Not supporting Julian Assange puts you on the wrong side. Supporting Russia and its right to defend the people of Donetsk and Lugansk and opposing the flow of weapons to Ukraine puts you on the right side. Denouncing Russia puts you on the wrong side, right? And that it is more and more about which side are you on, and less about which ideology do you believe in, because there are many people who've got pictures of Mao on the wall, pictures of Stalin on the wall, pictures of Che Guevara on the wall, that are on the wrong side, that want Julian Assange to rot in prison for the rest of his life, that cheer for the Nazi Azov battalion. And there are more and more people on, with ideologies and understandings of history that are completely contrary to mine that get it. And we just have to be aware of this fact. And we have to function that way. And if you're following an old playbook where there's the right wing and the left wing, you don't know what you're talking about. As I said, in Britain, the right wing had two very, very contrary groups in the 1930s. In the United States, the black struggle had two very contrary groups in Harlem in the 1930s. In the United States and around the world, communism had two very contrary groups. Marxism, Leninism had two very contrary groups during this time. And that people interpret ideologies in different ways, and that there are real forces that are at odds with each other. There is a divide in the ruling class between the ultra monopolies and their drive for degrowth fascism and the lower levels of capital and the oppressed countries that are striving to grow. And that is the dividing line in the world. And the question is, which side are you on? That's the question. Which side are you on? That is the question. Which brings me an issue that everyone's talking about, which they should be talking about, is that absolutely disgraceful event in the Canadian Parliament recently, where they applauded for someone who fought on the side of the Nazis in World War II against the Soviet Union, against America, against the communists, against the forces of democracy, against the United Nations. And I'm glad that there's outrage, right? People like us, we've been sitting here and we've been seeing this the whole conflict, the whole time. We've been seeing this, Nazis on the Ukrainian side. But it seems like, the fact that that Justin Trudeau is apologizing, it indicates that there are more people that see us than just us, which is a really good sign. And I'm starting to think, with the lack of a reception Zelensky got in DC, and now this, that things are starting to shift. And I really hope that there's starting to be a shift when it comes to the global perspective on Ukraine. I'm really, really hoping that is the case, that the wind is starting to blow in a new direction. I do not know that is the case, but God, hope that is the case, because things are getting desperate out here and it's getting dangerous out here. But in light of that, I wanted to, in my opening remarks tonight, point out to you why it is that in so many of my speeches, I talk about Superman. I don't know, maybe this is just me, but when I watch one of those old Christopher Reeve Superman movies from the 80s, I get a good feeling. There's just something beautiful about those movies. The John Williams soundtrack, dun 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 dun, and there's just something. It's hokey, it's fake, it's very much 1950s nostalgia. These films were made during the Reagan years in the 80s, and it's kind of appealing to good old days. It's kind of like the show Happy Days or something like that. It's trying to appeal to a conservative, but regardless, you just feel good when you watch one of those 80s Superman movies. There's a happiness in the movie. There's an optimism in the movie, right? It's just there. You can't deny it. And that optimism is part of the Superman tradition. Now, unfortunately, some of the more recent Superman movies don't have that. I would argue that, they made like Superman, Man of Steel, and that one was a pretty dark movie. It was almost like it was made by the Batman guy. It wasn't, but that, Superman, if you read the original comic books, was published in 1939, Cleveland, Ohio. Two guys who, both of whom were of Jewish heritage and were leftists. They weren't communists, but they were friendly with the Communist Party, friendly with the labor movement. And they came up with the story of Superman. And they wrote this comic book, and one of the first adventures of Superman is to rescue a group of miners who are on strike. You're on the list. Rescue a group of miners who are on strike, and Superman is against racism, and he fights the KKK, and Superman is against violence, and he's always talking about how violence needs to be overcome. We need a world without war. Superman is the best of the Roosevelt years. The politics that I seek to restore are the politics of the Roosevelt coalition, the politics of William Z. Foster, the politics of Gus Hall, the politics of Henry Wallace, who was the vice president. And we have gotten so far away from that. When I first read the Century for the Common Man speech, or listened to the Century for Common Man speech by Henry Wallace, it brought tears to my eyes. This was the vice president of the country. And because I feel like so much of what I do is about trying to bring back the optimism, the solidarity, the anti-racism, the class struggle, the struggle for peace of that, the pro-growth, the pro-industrialization attitudes of that era. I thought that I would play for you tonight the Century for the Common Man speech, or the Armed Forces movie of the Century for the Common Man speech by Henry Wallace. This was the vice president of our country during World War II. Keep that in mind. This isn't some communist leader. This isn't some agitator. This was the vice president of America during World War II. And I just want to play this film for you. We might stop a couple times. We might not. We'll see how it goes. But I want everyone who is watching right now to see this.
We who in a formal or an informal way represent most of the free peoples of the world are met here tonight in the interest of the millions in all the nations who have freedom in their souls, to let those millions in the other countries know that here in the United States are 130 million men, women, and children who are in this war to the finish. Our American people are utterly resolved to go on until they can strike the relentless blows that will assure a complete victory, and with it, win a new day for the lovers of freedom everywhere on this earth. This is a fight between a slave world and a free world. Just as the United States in 1862 could not remain half slave and half free, so in 1942 the world must make its decision for a complete victory one way or the other. Down the years, the people of the United States have moved steadily forward in the practice of democracy. When the freedom-loving people march, when the farmers have an opportunity to buy land at reasonable prices and to sell the produce of their land through their own organizations, when the workers have the opportunity to form unions and bargain through them collectively, and when the children of all these opportunities are open to everyone, then the world moves straight ahead. But through the leaders of the Nazi Revolution, Satan now is trying to lead the common man of the world back into slavery and darkness. For the stark truth is that the violence preached by the Nazis is the devil's own religion of darkness. So also is the doctrine that one race or one class is by heredity superior, and that all other races or classes are supposed to be slaves. The march of freedom of the past 150 years has been a long, drawn-out people's revolution. In this great revolution of the people, there were the American Revolution of 1775, the French Revolution of 1792, the Latin American revolutions of the Bolivarian era, the German Revolution of 1848, the Russian Revolution of 1918.
Did you just hear that? He listed off great people's revolutions. He started with America, and then France, and then the South American revolutions of the Bolivarian era, and then the German Revolution of 1848, and then the Russian Revolution of 1918. Utterly, utterly amazing. Utterly, utterly amazing.
Each spoke for the common man in terms of blood on the battlefield. Some went to excess, but the significant thing is that the people groped their way to the light. The people are on the march toward even fuller freedom than the most fortunate peoples of the earth have hitherto enjoyed. No Nazi counter-revolution will stop it. The common man will smoke the Hitler stooges out into the open in the United States, in Latin America, and in India. He will destroy their influence. No Lavals, no Mussolinis, will be tolerated in a free world. The people, in their millennial and revolutionary march toward manifesting here on earth the dignity that is in every human soul, hold as their credo the 4 freedoms enunciated by President Roosevelt. We who live in the United States may think there is nothing very revolutionary about freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and freedom from the fear of secret police. But when we begin to think about the significance of freedom from want for the average man, then we know that the revolution of the past 150 years has not been completed.
Freedom from want. That's what he's emphasizing. Freedom from want.
Either here in the United States or in any other nation in the world. We know that this revolution cannot stop until freedom from want has been attained.
Not degrowth. Freedom from want. Freedom from want.
And now, as we go forward toward realizing the 4 freedoms of this people's revolution, I would like to talk about 4 duties. It is my belief that every freedom, every right, every privilege has its price, its corresponding duty, without which it cannot be enjoyed. The 4 duties of the People's Revolution, as I see them today, are these. The duty to produce to the limit. The duty to transport as rapidly as possible to the field of battle. The duty to fight with all that is in us. The duty to build a peace, just, charitable, and enduring. The 4th duty is that which inspires the other 3. We failed in our job after World War I, but by our very errors we learned much. And after this war, we shall be in position to utilize our knowledge in building a world which is economically, politically, and I hope spiritually sound. There must be neither military nor economic imperialism. Some have spoken of...
There must be neither military nor economic imperialism.
But by our very errors we learned much. And after this war, we shall be in position to utilize our knowledge in building a world which is economically, politically, and I hope spiritually sound. There must be neither military nor economic imperialism. Some have spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering, the century which will come out of this war, can be and must be the century of the common man. If we really believe we are fighting for a people's peace, all the rest becomes easy. Production, yes. It'll be easy to get production without either strikes or sabotage. Production with a wholehearted cooperation between willing arms and keen brains. Enthusiasm, zip, energy, geared to the tempo of keeping at it everlastingly day after day. Hitler knows as well as those of us who sit in on the War Production Board meetings that we here in the United States are winning the battle of production. He knows that both labor and business in the United States are doing a most remarkable job. I need say little about the duty to fight. Some people declare, and Hitler believes, that the American people have grown soft in the last generation. Hitler agents continually preach that we are cowards, unable to use, like the brave German soldiers, the weapons of modern war. It is true that American youth hates war with a holy hatred. But because of that fact, And because Hitler and the German people stand as the very symbol of war, we shall fight with a tireless enthusiasm until war and the possibility of war have been removed from this planet. We shall cleanse the plague spot of Europe, which is Hitler's Germany, and with it the hellhole of Asia, Japan. The American people have always had guts, and always will have. You know the story of bomber pilot Dixon, and radio man Gene Aldrich, and ordnance man Tony Pastula. The story which Americans will be telling their children for generations to illustrate man's ability to master any fate. These men lived for 34 days on the open sea in a rubber life raft 8 feet by 4 feet, with no food but that which they took from the sea and the air, with one pocket knife and a pistol. And yet they lived it through and came at last to the beach of an island they did not know. In spite of their suffering and weakness, they stood like men, with no weapon left to protect themselves, and no shoes on their feet, and walked in military file, because they said, if there were Japs, we didn't want to be crawling. The American fighting men, and all the fighting men of the United Nations, will need to summon all their courage during the next few months. I am convinced that the year 1942 will be a time of supreme crisis for all of us. Hitler, like the prize fighter, who realizes he is on the verge of being knocked out, is gathering all his remaining forces for one last desperate blow. The convulsive efforts of the dying madman will be so great that some of us may be deceived into thinking that the situation is bad at a time when it is really getting better. But in the case of most of us, the events of the next few months, disturbing though they may be, will only increase our will to bring about complete victory in this war of liberation. Spiritually prepared, we cannot be surprised. Psychological terrorism will fall flat. As we nerve ourselves for the supreme effort in this hemisphere, we must not forget the sublime heroism of the oppressed in Europe and Asia. There can be no half measures. No compromise with Satan is possible. We shall not rest until all the victims under the Nazi yoke are freed. We shall fight for a complete peace as well as a complete victory. The people's revolution is on the march, and the devil and all his angels cannot prevail against it. They cannot prevail, for on the side of the people is the Lord. He giveth power to the faint. To them that have no might he increaseth strength. They that wait upon the Lord shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Strong in the strength of the Lord, we who fight in the people's cause will never stop until that cause is won.
That is the optimism that you hear and you feel when you watch one of those Superman movies. That's where it comes from. That I watched that film, and it's interesting because I've watched it many, many times. But what struck me in watching it this time with you all was what he's pointing out in that film subtly is that Nazism is the ideology of pessimism. He says that, that they're trying to pull the world back into slavery. Right? And that he's emphasizing that Nazism is the doctrine that one race or one class is naturally superior, It is looking backward, right? And in the actual speech that he gave that's based on, he even calls out paganism. And he says, Goddammerung has come for Odin and his crew. And that he's pointing out that Nazi Germany, everything about Nazi Germany was centered on a desire to go backwards, a desire to force human creativity and human progress backwards. And that actually, in research for my recent book, I actually read a pro-Nazi book written by an American white supremacist. Let me pull it out here. And I read this book, and it really came across in the book. And I quoted it in my new book to show this, that the essence of Nazism was about moving backward. If I can get the book off the shelf here, it's jammed in there. Maybe I won't be able to, but all right. Well, it's jammed in there. But Lothrop Stoddard, I don't know if you know that name. He was a eugenicist and a white supremacist, and he was on the National Board of Planned Parenthood. And Lothrop Stoddard he was a Ku Klux Klansman. He was a white supremacist, and he was a good friend of Margaret Sanger and the Rockefellers. And because he was such an outspoken white supremacist, as World War II was getting started, before the United States got involved, the Nazis actually invited him to Germany as the war had already gotten going. And he wrote this short book about what Nazi Germany was like in 1939, just after the war had gotten going. And I read that book, and I quoted it because in that book, pessimism was everywhere. It was all about pessimism. That Nazism was about going backward. It was about the belief that some people are naturally superior to other people, that we need to go back to our more traditional and authoritarian ways. We need to try and recreate some kind of ancient empire. It was about admiration for the pre-Christian religions of Europe, paganism, Odin and Valhalla, and military obsessionism, and a big emphasis on people having less. A big emphasis on that. You're on the list. Good question. A big emphasis on people having less. And that was the essence of the period. That was the essence of Nazism. Whereas if you just saw in that film, everything that Roosevelt and Stalin were promoting was all about building and constructing. The way that film ends, where you see that crowd of people marching up over the hill, and it says, the people's revolution is on the march, and the devil and all of his angels cannot stop her. And the quotes from the Bible that what World War II was about. It was about a fight between the forces that believed in human progress, that believed in economic growth and science and development, the center of which, and the most radical of which, was the Soviet Union, led by Stalin, and the degrowth pessimism faction that wanted to just grind human history backward to resolve the capitalist crisis. That's what World War II was about. And that just comes across if you watch that film that I just showed you. I've watched it many times, but this time that just came abundantly across. He's talking about the devil's own religion of darkness, grinding the world back into slavery. And then he's showing, the people's revolutions that have advanced human rights, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the South American revolutions of the Bolivarian era, the German Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. That this was a fight between reaction and progress and revolution. It was a fight between reaction and revolution. And America put itself on the side of revolution, even though they weren't where the Bolsheviks were. And the Nazis were a reactionary force. And I watched that film, and the horrifying thing, and I hate to ruin y'all's day because I almost don't want to say this because this is so horrifying to realize, in that movie, America is Nazi Germany. Because this country is seething with nothing but pessimism, degrowth, the opposition to historical progress, people becoming obsessed with sex and doing weird, crazy things and suicide and addiction. The role in the world, even though the ideology and the perspective is very different, the pessimism that defined Nazism. We're going to grind humanity backwards. We believe some people are just naturally superior to others. We're going to go backward. The devil's own religion of darkness, Odin and his crew. That's America right now. If that movie was made today, it wouldn't be the Nazis that they were talking about. It'd be America. America is the center of pessimism right now. America and Britain are the center of pessimism. They are the center of anti-humanism. They are the center of degrowth and fascism. The essence of fascism, which is anti-humanism and rolling back the wheels of history. And China and Russia and Iran and all the countries that are defying them are the new America. They're the new America right now. They're the people marching up over that hill. It's disturbing to watch, but it's becoming blatantly clear. And when they cheer for that Nazi in the Ukrainian parliament, they make it blatantly obvious. The devil's own religion of darkness is all over America right now. The devil's own religion of darkness is everywhere in this country right now. But the people's revolution is on the march with the Belt and Road, with the Eurasian Economic Union, with the African countries that are lifting their people up out of poverty. I'm blown away. I've watched that film so many times. And never has it struck me how much we are in this kind of situation. We are in the lead up to World War II, except we're living in the new Berlin. We're living in the new Nazi Germany. I mean, it's shocking to me. It's shocking to me. You think about one aspect of Nazi Germany. There's so much about this we don't know. Slave labor was a big aspect of Nazi society, right? That's how they rebooted the German economy, slave labor. The U.S. economy right now is built on slave labor. Did you know that? People in prisons answer your phone calls. People in prison make military aircraft. The U.S. economy is full of prison labor that is utilized. If they want good paying jobs to come back, take them out of the prisons. You don't have to bring them back from overseas. Bring them out of the prisons. Make all the phone companies that have prisoners work for 2 cents an hour start hiring law-abiding citizens on the outside. Slave labor, which was a big aspect of the Nazi economy, is a big aspect of the American economy. Military spending. Right? The Nazis created the world's first military-industrial complex. That's what the U.S. economy is based on, military spending. You watch that, and it's very, very, very apparent. Wow. It's shocking to watch, but as we watch that, the values of that film, that was a guy who praised Stalin all the time, Henry Wallace. He praised the Bolshevik Revolution in that film. He talked about freedom from want and the right of workers and the right of people to get an education. He was a socialist, Henry Wallace. But in that film, he appealed to very American values, the tradition of the American Revolution, the Bible. There are things in the American spirit that can be used to defeat fascism. There are things in our American identity that can be used to defeat the devil's own religion of darkness. We Americans believe in growth. We Americans believe in freedom from want and abundance. We Americans believe in self-defense. We Americans believe in humanity and expansion. And if we don't figure out how to start appealing to the parts of the American soul that can be used to defeat pessimism and fascism, then we're fools. Right? That film, wow, I'm blown away. I haven't watched it in a long time, and it struck me as I watched that film how much of it. So before we do the roll call, I just want to show you all this, remind you all this. We're having a mega anti-imperialist rally in Portland, Oregon on December 2nd. I need you there. I need you there. I need you to get your ass to Portland, Oregon. Get on a plane, get on a train, get on an automobile, get on a speedboat, get on a high-speed rail, get on a Segway, get on a bike, get yourself to Portland, Oregon. We need you in Portland. We need you in Portland, Oregon. We need you there. We need you in Portland, Oregon. We're going to have buses from Seattle. The John Reed Center is going to work with us to bus people in from Seattle. We're going to have buses from Northern California. We need you to get to Portland. We are going to have a mega anti-imperialist rally to gather all the forces of hope and progress and growth and optimism and peace in one place, to bond with each other, to do something beautiful. We need you there. We need you there in Portland, Oregon. We need you there. This is going to be the most important event of 2023. Rage Against the War Machine was probably more important. The second most important event, but this is going to be keeping the spirit of Rage Against the War Machine alive. And some of the main organizers of Rage Against the War Machine, like Nick Brana, are going to be there. We are going to end this year of 2023, a year full of danger, but great potential. We are going to end the year of 2023. In the last month, we're going to kick off the last month of the year with a mega anti-imperialist gathering on the West Coast. Jyoti Brar of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, is going to be there. Nick Brana is going to be there. Scott Ritter is going to be there. It is going to be so important, and we need you there. And watching it online will not do it justice. Watching the video afterwards isn't going to count. We need you there as a person. We need you to build real connections with other people while you are there. We need you to make friends. We need you to meet people who are watching this right now who you've never talked to. You've never shaken hands with them. You've never given them a hug before. We need you there. We need you in Portland. We need you there, right? You got to decide. Is this just some kind of passive internet entertainment? Are you going to watch me and then watch one of the rodeo clowns, then watch some cat video after this? Or are you in this for real? Are you committed to being part of the network that we need? Because we urgently need a network. World War III could break out soon. I am not exaggerating. We are living in very dangerous times. We're on borrowed time right now. The clock is counting down. We need to build an anti-imperialist movement. We need to build love and trust among our community. We need people to get off the internet and into the real world. I am only on this platform on YouTube and Rumble. I am only here to recruit you to a real life movement. That is all I'm doing. Carter is already joining. We got somebody who's going to sign up tonight. You'll be our 123rd member. Glad to have you. I am only here to recruit you. I have no other intention with this YouTube channel. I am not here to sell soap. I am not here to get likes and views. I am not here to develop a fandom. I am here to recruit you. Every book that I write, every speech that I give, every video that I make is about recruiting you. I want to recruit you to the city building tendency. I want to recruit you to the movement to save America. I want to recruit you to God's mission on earth to drive out Satan and the devil's religion of darkness. I want to recruit you to bring down imperialism and build a world of justice and truth. And that is my only purpose in doing any of this. And if you think there's some other purpose, you are wrong. I have one purpose on these streams, and that is to recruit you. And so if you are ready to be recruited, and if you are ready to give yourself to this, you are ready to believe and organize, I'm glad to have you. And if you're watching this for a form of entertainment or whatever, you're probably in the wrong place. You should probably stop watching right now, because I am not here to fool around. I'm not here to tell you what a dude I am. I'm not here to get you mad at your parents. I'm not here to make fun of people and insult people. I'm not a comedian. Not an entertainer. Not a dude bro. Not a pessimist. I am an organizer. I am an organizer, and we are in desperate times. And I will say this. All my life, people have said to me, Caleb, you are a fanatic. You're a fanatic, Caleb. Calm down. Calm down, Caleb. Breathe. Why do you think about this stuff all day long? Why don't you think about anything else? Why are you so intense? Why are you so go? And all my life, I've felt like I was the odd man out because I think about this stuff all day long. I live, breathe, and sleep this stuff. And people just can't stand it about me. They want me to be normal. They want me to calm down, and I just can't do it. But I got to tell you this. If you had a heart attack tonight, and you were being rushed to the hospital to have heart surgery to save your life, would you want a half-assed doctor to operate on you? Or would you want a fanatical, dedicated, obsessive doctor to operate on you? Well, I think you know the answer to that. And I've often said that revolutionaries are a lot like dentists. Nobody likes to go to the dentist's office. Nobody does. Right? There are some people, though, that want to be dentists. You know, I think I watched, what was that one of those old claymation, Christmas specials where they got the kid who's playing with the doll's teeth. I want to be a dentist. There are people like that. There are people that love dentistry, that love teeth from the time that they're kids. They love teeth. They're playing with the doll's teeth when they're a kid. They study dentistry. They go to dentistry school. They become dentists. There are people like that. And most of us think those people are freaks and they're weirdos. And most of us will do anything we can to avoid going to the dentist. We just want to live our lives. We don't like the drill. We don't like it. However, that day comes when you've got that cavity that hurts so bad, where you can't stand it anymore, and you say, God damn it, I got to find me a dentist. I got to find me some freak who thinks about nothing but teeth all day long, who graduated from dentistry school. I got to find me some tooth expert to pull that cavity out, to give me the best dental care I want. That's the moment that is coming. That is the moment that America is facing. Sure, most of the time people would prefer not to think about revolution. Most of the time people would prefer not to think about communism and Marxist economics. But the cavity is getting worse. And the pain is becoming more intense. And your average store-bought toothbrush ain't gonna cut it anymore. We are entering a period where you're gonna need an expert. You're gonna need a fanatic. You're gonna need a group of people who give the whole of their lives. You're gonna need a group of people who believe in this and live and breathe it. You're gonna need a group of people who are ready to go all in, ready to endure persecution, ready to make sacrifices, ready to risk their lives. You're gonna need that. And if you don't think we're going to need that, take a look at Donetsk and Lugansk right now. Take a look at what Syria has been through. Take a look at what's going on the African continent. Take a look at what's happened in Venezuela. We're going to need that. America is going to have a cavity it can't stand pretty soon, and it's going to need a group of fanatics, a group of fanatical, dedicated people, a group of freaks and obsessed, dedicated people who are willing to give the whole of their lives to rescue it. Maybe that's you, and maybe it's not. But that's what we're going to need. And that is what I am trying to build. I am looking for a few good men and a few good women, a few good people who are in this for real and are willing to make sacrifices and understand truth and justice. That's what I'm looking for. And if that's you, I need you more than ever. And if that's not you, sorry. And yes, as our group of dedicated, loyal people develops, we will develop a mass line. We will find a way to unite with all who can be united. But before we can walk, we have to crawl. But once we can crawl, then we can walk, and then we can run. We are going to run faster than anything you've ever seen. But if you read my book, my big book that I've been giving to people, everyone who comes to our events gets one of these for free, Where is America Going? You will read in that book about George Sorel. And you will read about the origins of the Chinese Communist Party. And you'll read about the origins of Bolshevism. And you will understand what I'm talking about. You will understand the weird dynamic that exists between a mass organization, a mass movement, as well as an isolated group of fanatics, and how a genuine revolutionary movement engages in both top and bottom organizing. And you will understand this. And it's not a simple concept. And how Marx contrasted his organization with the Society of December 10th of Louis Bonaparte, that Lenin developed his party of a new type, and George Sorel had his critique, and the Bolsheviks, and the Society of December 10th, and you'll understand it all. It's all in the book. Go and read the book. Go and read the book. It's all here for you to understand. That's what I'm telling you. I am here to recruit you. I am here to build a real movement. I'm here to offer you a life you can't get. You can't get in this decaying and dying society. I'm here to offer you the only thing that has ever given me happiness in my life. And you can take it or leave it. See you in Portland. And on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. That's funny. Names and locations. You're on the list, Gannon. I'm not sure I get the joke, but it's funny. Names and locations. All right. That's great. John McCarthy in Chicago. George Muniz in Sydney. Temple City, California. Christian! It's been a while. It's so great. It's so great to have you back. Jenny in Cincinnati. Carolina from Berlin. Wow, you're in Berlin. That's cool. Right? John in your mom's bedroom. Oh, you got me. You nailed me, John. Well, I'm in your mom's bedroom every night. Anyways, this is like elementary school level humor we got here. You got me, John. All right. Nidahan in Baltimore. Lori in Oklahoma. Carter from Duluth, Minnesota. Right? Gonzalo in Argentina. Right? Who else? Carl in Washington, Patch in Arizona, Gabby in Chicago, Patrick in Maine, Ryan Clark in Kansas City. Welcome, welcome. Mariah, Batman is the one you date. Superman. Oh, that's good. That's good. I like that. Bob Troy in New York, Saviero Faloni from Mexico, Zach Brunch, who's got an amazing TikTok channel, Rice from Adelaide, Australia, Reza in Tehran, David Rennie in Hamilton, Ontario. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Jorge in Yoruba Valley. Welcome, Jorge. Maine. Interesting way of spelling it. Montreal. Very, very good. Very, 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 very good. Very good. All right. All right. Now, let's see. On Rumble, we got Auckland, New Zealand, Kiwi Corner, right? I don't see anything on the Rumble. I don't see any Rumble rants, but that's fine. We got plenty of super chats here. On the Rockfin, there's 4 people watching, but I don't see anything in the chat. So we're mainly just here on YouTube. So what I'm going to do before I start answering questions here on YouTube, work in progress is in Ottawa. Before I do that, it's interesting. I have never been a LaRouche guy. I just never have been. I draw a lot heavily from LaRouche. I quote LaRouche in my writings, but I'm not a LaRouche member and never have been. And I'll prove that tonight. I will do something that is in the LaRouche universe. Chris in Salt Lake City, shout out to you, is a huge crime. I am going to put on some music right now. And this music, this song that I'm about to put on, was written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney. I know. So if there are any LaRoucheites watching, trigger warning. And this doesn't mean I don't find your critique of Beatles music to be inspiring, but this is from the last. This is a song that was on the last album of the Beatles, Abbey Road. But this is it's a song called "You Never Give Me Your Money," that I believe is about optimism. And this is somebody recorded it for YouTube. I typed in, I found a cover version of it. Can't play the actual thing or else my stream is going to get shut down. This is a cover version of the Beatles song, "You Never Give Me Your Money," which I think is an optimistic song. A lot of the Beatles music, yes, I would argue is not good for you. Sgt. Pepper is a pretty dark album and all of that. But this song, I've been thinking about it a lot lately, especially as I study Wallace Wattles. And shout out to you, Tyler McConnell. You got me into Wallace Wattles, the socialist self-help optimist guy, and that was a great discovery. I love Wallace Wattles. I am on a Wallace Wattles kick. I am listening to that stuff every day as I try to envision Portland, as I try to move toward our organization expanding. But I'm going to put on this Beatles song that I think is about optimism and hope, getting out of dark situations. I'm going to put it on. So trigger warning to my LaRouche friends. Here we go.
Never give me your money. Take 7.5. Prise 8. You never give me your money.
shack. Monday morning, turning back. Yellow lorry slow, nowhere to go. But oh, that magic feeling, nowhere to go. Oh, that magic feeling, nowhere to go. Nowhere to go. One sweet dream, pick up the bag, get in the limousine. Soon we'll be away from here. Step on the gas and wipe that tear away. One sweet dream came true today. Came true today. Came true today. Yes, it is more, 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 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the children go to heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the children go to heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the children go to heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the children go to heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the children go to heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the children go to heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the children go to heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the children go to heaven.
All righty. So I'm curious if anyone has a Larouchian critique of that song and why it would be an affront to our intelligence. I'm open to hearing it, right? I'm very interested in musical criticism, political musical criticism, these kinds of things. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily endorsing that song. I find it very inspiring, and it's related to the optimism that I like to promote on these streams. But if someone can give me a solid musical, political, aesthetic critique of it, right? Because I mean, that is a big central belief of many in our community, is that Beatles music is an affront in some ways. I'm open to hearing it. A lot of Beatles music is very dark and pessimistic. It leaves you in kind of a sad, lonely place. But that one I find to be kind of empowering. So there you go. Maybe I'm open. I'm open to learning. I am impressed by people who can develop musical critiques. I really want to read Cornelius Cardew's pamphlet, Punk Rock is Fascist. I really want to read that. If anyone can help me get a copy of Punk Rock is Fascist by Cornelius Cardew, or upload a PDF of it, I really want to read it. So, we are open to different views here. All righty. Dan Fenton is baiting me, wants me to get into a fight with the Haas community, is asking me, are we already in socialism? I would say we are not. The reason that we are not is because I would argue that the means of production in our economy function according to preliminary transformation. Frederick Engels said, under capitalism, the means of production function only as preliminary transformation into capital, meaning that the profits are in command. Profits dictate production. If we had a system that had overturned capitalism, I would argue that we would not be facing the long-term economic crisis. If we had a command economy, our central planners would just plan in a way that there'd be more stability. And I would argue that the increasing instability of U.S. society, rooted in the problem of overproduction, means that we are definitely not living in socialism. Now, there are various methods of economic control that do exist. We have a Federal Reserve. We have a huge amount of government subsidies. We have the military-industrial complex. But as I lay out in the first chapter of this book, the reason that we are having a meltdown in U.S. society today, and the reason that, society is becoming more and more unstable is rooted in the problem of the computer revolution and the elimination of labor, which is a built-in problem of the capitalist system, the problem of overproduction, the problem of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, the tendency of the falling rate of profits. And those problems would not exist if we lived in a socialist economy where we were able to dictate production according to rational need. Now, there is a lot of collective economic management and, government intervention into our economy. So in the libertarian sense of all government intervention being socialism, in the sense of bourgeois collective ownership, there's certainly plenty of that. But that doesn't overcome the built-in problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. And I think that if, in a socialist society, the means of production function according to the central planners. And if we had such a society, our central planners would simply dictate more economic stability and we would have it. And we don't have that. So we can't live in socialism, right? The society-wide crisis that we're seeing is a sign that we don't live in socialism. So, if somebody wants to cuss me out in a video and whatever, I don't care, right? I don't appreciate the bait, Dan. Dan, please don't try to get me into a fight with, one of these online people, but that was bait. And I gave you my honest answer. I wrote a whole book. Chapter 1 of my book is all about why the problem of U.S. society that we're living in is rooted in the built-in irrationalities of the profit system. So I think that would negate any notion that we live in socialism, unless you speak of socialism in the sense that Lenin refers to it when he refers to things like post offices and stuff. He says this is socialism of a kind, meaning it's collective bourgeois. In that sense, okay, there's a lot of that, right? And that there's a lot of government involvement in our economy, but we're still governed by the irrationalities of the laws of capitalism. So, I understand what Haas is saying. He's being provocative and he's making an interesting point, but I still think the problems of our society are rooted in capitalism, and that it is my duty as a revolutionary to explain why artificial intelligence and the technological leaps are leading to the long-term capitalist crisis. And if I go around saying that the USA is already socialist, I can't explain that, then can I? So I don't view that rhetorical device as useful. Right? I will say this, right? I have gotten canceled and harassed many times for things that I know to be true that are not obvious. And it seems to me like there are people in the internet circles, that have seen what happened to me, which I did not intend to happen to me, and have courted that. They have gone out of their way to say things that will trigger the libs in order to generate conversations around themselves, right? For example, I said abolish billionaires is contrary to Marxism, and Twitter exploded. How dare I? Well, anyone who actually listened to me would know that billionaire is just a measurement of wealth, and the basis of the higher stage of communism is so much wealth existing that there is no scarcity. And so saying that wealth is somehow bad is contrary to Marxism. And I said this over and over and over again, and many people just pretended to refuse to understand what I was saying. Said Caleb supports Jeff Bezos, said Caleb supports billionaires under this system, etc. All I was saying is that the phrase abolish billionaires implies that there should be a maximum on wealth. And that is contrary to Marxism. That's all I was saying. And honestly, I found the fact that I was harassed about it to be really annoying. I wasn't going out of my way to get harassed. I was going out of my way to try and teach people Marxism because I'm serious about this. This isn't an internet clown show. This is serious. I'm trying to teach people. It looks like there are other forces that observed that happening to me and thought, what various things can we do or say that will trigger the fake left and get us attention so we can get more viewers? Oh, nothing wrong with them doing that. More power to them. But there you go. There you go. Right? There you go. These are the same forces. Well, never mind. Anyway. Alrighty. I was told Trump talked to scabs in that speech. Didn't watch the whole thing. Wouldn't surprise me. Right? Trump is a Republican. He's a conservative. The speech sounded pretty pro-union when I heard it, but, There you go. Not surprised. I'll have to go watch it. And, I mean, it wasn't a Marxist speech. He was definitely trying to make clear his support for the UAW, but it wasn't a Marxist speech. It was probably inspired by the fact that Biden did it first and he wanted to, be one up on Biden. All right. Here's the question I wanted to get to. What was Marx's view toward materialism? Was his materialistic understanding derived from today's world of being addicted to material things under capitalism like consumerism, or the materialistic value created by workers and its dialectics? Well, NRJ, I appreciate you asking this question, right? And you should not be embarrassed at all, right? You shouldn't be embarrassed at all. And this is important. And I'm glad you asked, right? Because we have to be clear about what these things mean, right? And actually explaining what materialism in the Marxist sense means is like the third chapter of this book, Letter to Bob Avakian. It's like one of the main points in there. I grew up hearing that materialism, the way it's generally used, the word materialism in standard American English means people who are obsessed with owning stuff, right? Consumerism, shopaholics. That's what it means in average American vernacular. In philosophical vernacular, it has a very different meaning. It's not referring to products or consumerism or value or wealth. When Marx talks about materialism, he's referring to an argument among philosophers that goes back to ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, you had many different philosophers. Some of them were idealists and some of them were materialists. The idealists believed that the mind creates reality, and the materialists said that reality creates the mind. Materialism means that you believe the essence of the universe is material, that material comes first, and everything psychological or spiritual or emotional is a result of the material world. That's what materialism means in the Marxist sense. And it is opposed to idealism. And idealism says that the mind or spiritual forces created the material world. The material world is the result of the spiritual. And materialism says that no, the spiritual or the psychological is the result of the material. That is what the terms refer to. Right? And that's okay, because when I first came around, I was like, what are these people talking about with materialism? What in the world were they talking about? I didn't know it because it's used in a very different way than the word is used in common vernacular. And there's a lot of this that goes on among Marxists. They talk about contradictions. I mean, what a Marxist means when they say contradiction is very different. Imperialism, right? What is imperialism? Right? Imperialism to most people just means a country attacking another country or invading another country. Well, to Marxists, it refers to an economic system that came into existence around the late 1800s, the 1890s. It refers to a stage of capitalist development, capitalism in its monopoly stage. And it's really important. You have to talk about what these terms mean, because if you have arguments with people and you're arguing about different things, it means different things. I mean, so we have to be very, very clear about that. Marx's materialism, dialectical materialism, refers to the belief that all that exists in the world is matter, and that spiritual, psychological things are secondary. Now, Marx's materialism was different than previous materialists because Marx argued that matter is constantly changing and constantly in a state of motion, and that matter contradicting other matter, clashing with other matter, drives forward history. And that belief, the combination of philosophical materialism with the Hegelian concept of dialectic, which is change through struggle, change through contradiction, that is the Marxist philosophy called dialectical materialism, right? And then that lends itself to the notion that history is driven forward by economics, right? That economic systems and this striving to get to a higher mode of production drives forward history. That's called historical materialism. This is all important, right? This is all important. And I am not a pure dialectical materialist. I'm not. I believe in God, which is the definition of idealism. If you believe in a God, a creator, that is an idealist notion, right? If you think God said, let there be light, and there was light, that is not materialism. That's idealism, right? So I am much more of an idealist. And I feel like there was always an idealist aspect of myself that it took me a long time to acknowledge. And I talk about that in this book because I argue that Bob Avakian, this prominent American communist leader, he's also very much an idealist. There is idealism all over his writing, but because he denies it, he has an unhealthy relationship with his own idealism. That's a really big point in this book. So if you actually want to learn more about the Marxist understanding of idealism and materialism, why Marx was so anti-religious, etc., and where, I critique all of that, I would recommend you read Letter to Bob Avakian. You can learn from it. I use Bob Avakian's version of Marxism and I contrast it with my own understanding. So I would recommend you read that book. And I'm glad you asked that, NRJ. I'm really glad you asked. And people should be comfortable asking these kinds of questions, right? And whenever you create an atmosphere where people are embarrassed to ask questions, even though for some people that might be considered, and you're on the list, Carter, even though for some people that might be considered an ABC question, it's not, right? Where are you going to learn this? In school? You think you're going to learn this in your communism class? When I was in school, they taught us communism means everyone gets paid the exact same wage, no matter how hard they work, and you'd have to be an idiot to believe in that. That's what I was taught about communism. Right? They're not going to teach you this in school. All right. They're not going to educate you on this. Right. So there's no one else who can teach it. And if you go to the university, they're going to teach you a version that is intentionally designed to not be comprehensible. They're going to teach you a bunch of woke postmodernist bullshit. You want to learn this stuff, you got to learn it from communists, activists, people who are involved in the struggle. You got to learn it. You got to read communist pamphlets, William Z. Foster, Gus Hall. You got to read stuff that was written by people that were doing actual organizing. That's what you got to do. All right? You got to read Eugene Debs. You got to read Black Panther literature. You got to read stuff by people that were actually building and organizing. If not, you're not going to understand this stuff. Marx was made to be read in the process of struggle. And if you don't read Marx in the process of struggle, it's not going to make any sense to you. If you're not building a revolutionary organization, if you're not building an anti-imperialist movement, and you open Marx, it's not going to make sense to you. It's going to be confusing. Right? You have to read it in the context of organizing. All right? Look, there you go. Gabby is getting into all of these ideas because she's involved in the struggle. Right? And that is the context in which these books are meant to be read. And if you don't read the books in the context of struggle, number one, you're not going to understand them. And number two, any attempt to interpret them you're going to have is going to be completely wrong. Read Marx in struggle. And I recommend that people start with textbooks. Read textbooks first. Read the history of the three internationals. Read the fundamentals of Marxism, Leninism. Read our CPI textbook, We Are City Builders. Read a textbook first before you read the original texts. Because if not, you're going to be sitting there going, who's Kautsky? What's the first international? What's the second international? You need the context. The Marxist books tend to be written as polemics. Right? Generally, the big Marxist books, The Poverty of Philosophy, What Is to Be Done, they are Marxists arguing with other Marxists and using other Marxists to make their point. And they're written assuming you know who the other Marxist is, and that can make it very hard to comprehend. So I recommend people start with textbooks. Textbooks, introductory texts, introductory books, start with that, then read the classics. So you get the context. That is my advice. All right. Do you think that the time has come for Latin America and the Caribbean to follow the example of Niger? Well, the thing is, in Latin America and the Caribbean, there's Bolivarianism, right? And Bolivarianism, the 21st century socialist, anti-imperialist movement, Venezuela, which still holds power in Venezuela and Nicaragua, that movement, the pink tide, people call it, which has been rolled back in Bolivia and Ecuador, but still holds power very strongly in Cuba or in Nicaragua and in Venezuela, and then is aligned with the communist government of Cuba. That complicates things. right? And right now in South America, you'll notice that there is a wave of fake socialists that have taken power, right? In Colombia, that guy's not a communist. That guy's not a socialist. That guy's a fraud, right? He's a degrowther. In Chile, that guy's a fraud. I mean, Maduro is for real. Ortega is for real. The Peruvian guy, he was for real, and they ousted him. They removed him. He was a genuine anti-imperialist, the Peruvian president, Pedro Castillo, and they ousted him because he meant what he said. But there's a lot of, I've been trying to explain. I've explained this to people a number of times, but it's important to point out, right? So during the Cold War in Latin America, the United States tended to back the military of various South American countries in establishing military dictatorships in order to keep communists from coming to power. In various parts of Latin America, communists were winning elections. Communists had a lot of support in the labor movement. So the USA backed military governments to take power. And those military governments tended to represent what they called the officer caste, very light-skinned white people of Spanish heritage who were landowners and were, very racist. And they viewed the dark-skinned people, both the Afro, mulatto or African people, as well as the indigenous people, as being inferior, right? And anyone who's been to South or Central America talks about how racism is a bit different in that part of the world. Instead of it, in the United States, you got one drop of black blood, you're black. You got one drop of non-white blood, you're not white. It's not like that in South and Central America. There's much more of a shadism, right? The whiter you are, the better, quote unquote, you are. The darker you are, the lower you are. And that the lightest skinned people tend to be the people that own all of the land and are the leaders of the military and stuff. And the darker skinned people tend to be very poor. And there's kind of a sliding scale. And that's how South and Central America is. And until recently, most South and Central American countries were ruled by white people, very, very light-skinned people who were wealthy landowners. And there was a very, very big section of the population that didn't vote, that didn't speak Spanish, that lived in utter poverty in the countryside. And they were indigenous, and they had no political, they weren't voting. They were just not part of society. And the communists, in many cases, dedicated themselves to organizing those people. And Che Guevara in the countryside, the Sandinistas, the Cuban Revolution, it was about mobilizing those dark-skinned people in the countryside to fight for their rights. And what we saw with the rise of Bolivarian socialism is that in many Latin American countries, there was a division in the ruling class, and a more nationalistic section realized that empowering the darker-skinned people was a way to assert national sovereignty for the country against neoliberalism. And one thing led to another. And in Venezuela and in Nicaragua, that led to socialism. Now, Nicaragua, it's a little complicated because there was a revolution in the 80s, but then they were able to regain power through building kind of a popular front, empowering the darker-skinned people, etc. And the same happened in Venezuela and in Bolivia and elsewhere, but it was overturned. So in those countries, the main force the United States has aligned itself with historically has been the white rich people. And those white rich people that are tied in with the military, they are a minority. And they are a big minority. They're a small minority in these countries. The bulk of the people living in Central America and South America are dark-skinned, are indigenous, etc. However, the lighter-skinned people owned all the land. They were part of the military, and much of the darker-skinned populations were not politically involved. They were locked out of the political process, so they didn't have the ability to influence things. Well, that's changed, right? And that part of what spawned the rise of socialism in Latin America has been in the empowering of those people. So in light of that, especially during the Obama administration, the United States has shifted its tactics in South and Central America. And instead of supporting the old right wing, the hard right wing of Latin America, the Pinochet crowd, the Wackel, there was something called the World Anti-Communist League that existed. It was based on the island of Taiwan. It was headed by Chiang Kai-shek, and it was like a collection of these fanatical right-wing people, the World Anti-Communist League. Instead of supporting those people, now the United States funds a lot of environmental NGOs and a lot of George Soros groups and a lot of foundations that pay indigenous people to have art exhibits and stuff like that. You'll notice that during the Obama administration, both Honduras and Guatemala had a fake revolution where all the people were out in the streets and they overthrew the government, except nothing changed. And both Guatemala and Honduras both had a fake revolution during the Obama administration. Well, that was because of the fact that those countries, if they didn't have a fake revolution, they would have a real one, and it would be led by Venezuela and Cuba and people like that. So the Obama administration staged a fake revolution in those two countries. You know, Rios Montt, who was the brutal military dictator of Guatemala, he was put on trial for crimes and massacres of indigenous people, found guilty for crimes against humanity. Then they let him out on a technicality. But it was a big deal that they put him on trial, and they made a big point of, you know, showing that, you know, the world was concerned about these crimes against indigenous people. And that the Obama administration, seeing the rise of socialism in Latin America, said to the hard right wing of Latin America, guys, you're not going to win anymore. And it's true, right? The hard right, the traditional Cold War hard right in Latin America is not going to win anymore. They're outnumbered. There's way too many black and brown people. They're way too small of a minority. The Miami Cuban crowd, you know, there's a guy in Venezuela. I can't even remember his name. He's one of these people. He's like a political prisoner, they call him. Those people are never going to win anymore in Latin America. So the United States is pivoting its strategy. And part of that has been cultivating a layer of people in South and Central America who are synthetic left. Anarchists, environmentalists, indigenous religious groups that are anti-growth. And the U.S. government has been pouring a lot of money into the synthetic left of South America because that's the only chance they have to win. And you'll notice that now, especially in Nicaragua, they really try hard not to identify the government of Nicaragua with communism, which is bizarre because Daniel Ortega led a communist revolution in the 80s, right? I mean, he's a guerrilla fighter. If there's anyone who's a communist revolutionary, it's Daniel Ortega. He literally led a peasant communist war in the 80s, took power. You know, and like, you know, his government is aligned with North Korea and is aligned with China. And I mean, you know, but you'll notice I was there in Nicaragua, and when he was running for re-election, all the mainstream U.S. press started calling him a centrist dictator. I thought that was odd. Why did they call him a centrist? He's not a centrist. He's a communist, right? I was there in the square when he, you know, had his victory party, and all the kids are in their young pioneer outfits, and he's quoting Marx and Lenin and Stalin in his speech, and he's a communist. But they know that a lot of people in Central America, South America, think communists are the people who help them. So they've they try to portray the revolutionary governments in South and Central America as being, you know, centrist, populist, etc. And then they have these weird George Soros, degrowth, drug obsessed. A lot of these people are tied in with the drug cartels. Drug legalization and obsession with drugs is a big part of them, right? And a lot of the so-called opposition now, the fake left in South and Central America, are tied in with the drug cartels and the narco gangs, you know, and they've created a layer in South America that is loyal to the United States, that hates Russia, that hates China, that hates Nicaragua, that hates Venezuela, that is also socialist, and in some cases communist. I mean, the Chilean communists. The Communist Party of Chile is not a communist party. It's run by these kind of people. The Communist Party of Chile is completely controlled by these nuts, these fake socialists, right? And that there has been a big effort to change the political conversation, kind of like what they're doing over here, except they're doing it a lot later. Right? Where left no longer means pro-growth, no longer means anti-imperialist, no longer means pro-Russian and pro-Chinese. Left means college SJW, degrowth, environmentalism. And then they're against authoritarianism and dictators, and they're for human rights. They really emphasize opposition to religion, LGBT stuff, and drugs, which is the drug thing in Latin America. The narco gangs are particularly vicious and have been a big part of U.S. imperialism for a long time. So the drug aspect is particularly, that's an aspect here. The synthetic left wants everyone stoned out of their minds on drugs. But in Central America, it has Central and South America, it has a different connotation. It's much, much more complicated there because you have these drug gangs that kidnap and torture people and stuff. So, you're asking me about, I think the question was about, is Latin America going to follow what's happening in Niger? No, it's much more complicated than that. What I think will happen is that I think there will be layers of the old hard right wing that will eventually align themselves with legit socialists and against the synthetic left, kind of like what we're seeing over here with the Rage Against the War Machine coalition and stuff. There'll be an anti-monopoly coalition. But right now, things are confused. And you have to remember, here in the United States, right, I'm talking with right-wing people now, right? I've been a communist my whole life, but I'm friendly with the Libertarian Party. I'm friendly with Republicans. I'm friendly with the Unification Church, these anti-communists. That's not easy. Old communists can't do that. In Latin America, it's 10 times harder because these people have killed each other. All right. I can talk to Moonies and be friendly with Moonies because we both like North Korea. We both don't like the liberal order. My understanding of the history of the 20th century is about completely opposite of theirs, but I can be friendly with them. But, but it's difficult because they're very anti-communist and I'm very pro-communist. And, we have different perspectives. But, in South and Central America, in Guatemala and Honduras and in Chile and Argentina, it's a lot harder because these people have killed each other. These people have shot each other. There's dead bodies. There's a body count on both sides. Okay. Like the paramilitary groups and all that. So it's much more complicated. So to see any kind of anti-monopoly against the establishment coalition is going to be very difficult down there. And that's why, a lot of the people I know that are very pro-Maduro and very pro-Daniel Ortega are confusedly supporting the synthetic left in Latin America because they see it as against the right wing and also have a confused understanding of American politics or hate Trump and all of that because, again, there's a body count, right? Politics in South America, just like politics in the United States, just like politics globally, is twisting around. But in South America right now, because the USA so rapidly changed its tactics, things are in a weird spot. Now, things could obviously spiral in one direction. Venezuela is staying communist, staying socialist. Nicaragua is staying that way. Cuba is staying that way. But, other countries, things are confused. But, Pedro Castillo, he was a legit, genuine communist. And he got elected, but they ousted him. However, the guy in Colombia, the guy in Chile, these people are not legit communists. These people are just phonies, right? And it's complicated, right? And there's a lot of people in South and Central America who have a loyalty to the left, right? Just kind of like here. Except the other thing that makes it more complicated is because of Venezuela and because of Cuba and because of Nicaragua, you still have a legit left in a lot of these countries. And that's important to point out too, right? That here, most of the legit left have been lost. We at CPI, PCUSA, we're legit, but basically everyone who calls themselves a socialist or a communist, is just either irrelevant or doing the woke thing. But that's not true in South and Central America. Even though it's confusing right now, you still have a legit communist party. There's a party in Chile they were followers of Enver Hoxha, and then they adopted Alexander Dugin's ideology. Look them up. It's kind of fascinating. They're a party in Chile that they were Enver Hoxha communists, and then they shifted to being, followers of Duginism, Eurasianism, right? There is a communist party in Mexico, the PT, the Labor Party, that they were one of these like weird Enver Hoxha Maoist parties, and now they have a very close relationship with North Korea, and that they are very, very anti-imperialist, very pro-Russia, very pro-China, and they're part of the ruling coalition. So it's complicated, right? It's complicated is what I'm telling you. But For something to happen like what's happening in Niger, what's happening in Gabon, what's happening in Mali, no, that's not going to happen in South and Central America, because you don't have just a section of the military. It's going to go, well, Russia and China's given us a better deal, we're taking over. That's not going to happen. That and that things have gotten very confused, right? And that something like Rage Against the War Machine could never happen in South America. Look how hard it was to do Rage Against the War Machine here in the United States. Very difficult, right? Very, very difficult. We still did it, but it was very difficult. Imagine if all those speakers had members of their families shot in the head by the people of the other side. It would never happen, right? And that just like everywhere else, the dividing line in Central America is becoming, are you for the imperialists and their degrowth schemes? Or are you in favor of growth and aligning with the anti-imperialist forces? However, the forces on the right are so anti-communist, right? Anti-communism is what they're all about. They hate China. It's going to be very hard for them to be pro-Russian because of that. And the forces on the left there's a body count there. The WACL, the World Anti-Communist League, and all of that has literally killed so many leftists and communists that them working with the right wing is something they'll never do, right? They'll never do. The trauma, I mean, you don't know how many people were murdered in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. There was mass murder in South America. Nicaraguan civil war, tens of thousands of people killed. But in every one of these countries, Argentina, Venezuela, Bolivia, every one of these countries, the military would seize the government, and then they would just round up communist leftist students and kill them. And their bodies would be found on the street, or in some cases, they would drop them out of helicopters into the ocean, right? And you don't know how many people were slaughtered in the 70s and 80s in South and Central America. You want to talk about blood on your hands? Every one of those countries at one point, for the most part, had a military dictatorship that had a policy of executing communists and just slaughtering communists. And people don't realize that, right? And that's what infuriates me when people want to give me this body count. Oh, communism killed bajillion people. It's like every country in South and Central America, there's a body count of communists and leftists who've been disappeared. There's also a body count of indigenous neighborhoods and communities that were just slaughtered and destroyed in the name of anti-communism. And it was usually just a land grab. It really wasn't even about communism. And that's what they did in Guatemala, right? The wealthy families would want an area. And so they'd declare it to be a stronghold of communist revolutionaries. They'd go into the area and kill everybody and then seize the area for themselves and just kill all the indigenous people and say, oh yeah, well, one of them was a communist, I think. And they wouldn't have been communists. They would have just made it up, right? So, when there's a body count that's that massive, Latin America is in a confused place, I will say right now. But that doesn't mean, look, world events change very rapidly. World events change very, very rapidly. So, and there's people like Pedro Castillo. And in all of these countries where you have a strong synthetic left now, all of a sudden, you also have a legit left. You also have legit forces. You also have Russian and Chinese businesses that are doing investment. So it's complicated. That's what I'll say. I've gone on for too long, but it's an important question. All right. Superman is now portrayed as a dangerous individual. I didn't know that. I don't keep up with my comic books. That's disappointing. I like the old school Superman. Didn't know that they've done that. I will say the movie Superman, the Man of Steel, that came out, it had a lot of, it had a lot of Nietzschean stuff in it. So there you go. You're allowed to celebrate the achievements of Nazi Germany, but not the USSR. You get canceled and attacked. Yeah, I talked about on these streams. There's an endless amount of, the Nazis, they made the trains run on time and they had a good economy. But if you say anything good about the USSR, people go, oh, you must be retarded. Everyone knows. Everyone was just poor and starving the entire time the Soviet Union existed. It's infuriating. It is absolutely infuriating. Many men say they're done with chicks in America. I don't know. I mean, I know that's a big thing, right? You got the incels, you got the MGTOWs and all of that. Look, social relations in the United States are fucked right now. And a big reason for that is because of porn, right? Pornography is everywhere in U.S. society. I'm not advocating it be outlawed because I don't know how you would enforce that. But the accessibility of porn, the fact that people get porn on their phones and there's porn everywhere, has made it very hard for people to have normal sexual relationships, right? You're on the list. I mean, you can't deny that, right? I'm not trying to shame anybody for looking at it. I'm not trying. And this is one thing I will actually, the Libertarian Party chair tweeted this out today. She said, in libertarian circles, you can't criticize anything without people immediately assuming you want state action against it. Look, I don't think smoking weed is good for you. But if you smoke weed, you're my comrade, you're my brother. I don't care that you smoke weed. I personally, my view is that stuff probably isn't good for you. But there are people that are my brothers, my comrades, who smoke legal marijuana, and I respect their right to do that. Just because I say I don't think something is good doesn't mean I think you're a bad person for doing it. And it certainly doesn't mean I think it should be illegal. I am for drug legalization, right? No one should go to jail for using drugs. And honestly, I'm not in favor of using marijuana, just like I'm not in favor of people getting drunk. I'm not in favor of people, but at the same time, I don't think you're a bad person if you smoke weed, right? Porn, right? Porn exists. People view it, I'm not here to condemn anybody for that. But in terms of our society overall, I'm talking macro. I'm not talking about individual people and the choices they make and what might be on their phone, right? Because this is all they have to do, right? I'm on here and I say I think pornography is bad for our society. And then they find somebody one time, I'm at an event, looks over my shoulder and sees a dirty ad on my phone. And they're like, aha, we got him. He's a hypocrite. Aha. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you're bad if you look at something on your phone, if you read some dirty stuff on your phone sometime. I'm not saying you're bad if I'm not saying that every person that may indulge or consume sexually explicit material is bad. I'm saying that the overall pornographication of our society is not good. And I think that that is a pretty solid argument. Okay? I think that that's a pretty solid argument. The fact that there is sexually explicit and stimulating material everywhere now, so widely accessible, has not had a good impact on marriages, relationships, dating, things like that. I think that's an okay thing to say, right? That doesn't mean I think it should be illegal. And honestly, I don't even know what you would do about it. But the pornographication of our society hasn't been good. On top of that, many people have talked about how, as we kind of deconstruct, the traditional male role and as women are more empowered, that's all great. But it leaves a lot of confusion about what does it mean to be a man now, right? I watched the Barbie movie, right? The Ken character in the Barbie movie. Is that what women want men to be? I don't think so, right? He has like a childish meltdown and starts crying like a 3-year-old. Is that what women want from men? I don't think so. Women want men to be men. They don't like it when their man is breaking down and crying like a 3-year-old. But that's what feminism tells them they're supposed to want. There's a lot of weird stuff nowadays where there's the feminist political position of what women are supposed to want, and then there's what women actually want, which in a lot of cases, not universally, it's very different. Every person is different, but in a lot of cases, what a lot of women want out of relationships is more traditional. And there are many women that feel torn about that. Right? That on the one hand, they feel like I'm supposed to want, but on the other hand, what they actually want in terms of sexual attraction and a romantic partner is very different. And, I'm married and I'm not dating anybody and I don't have to worry about this. And I thank God for that. I thank God for my wife. I love her deeply, and the people on the internet sphere have been vicious to her, and she's, I love my wife deeply, and I'm deeply moved by everything that she's been put through, but yet stood by me. And, she's awesome. And I'm really glad that I'm married. Really glad that I'm married, and I'm really glad I'm not out dating people and trying to figure this out because, I don't know what I would do nowadays, because there seems to be a huge amount of people not knowing what they want, people being told they should want one thing, and it's all very confusing. So you asked me, I think the question was about MGTOWs or guys who don't date anymore and all of that. I mean, I obviously don't endorse any misogyny or any hatred of women. I obviously don't, I believe women should be empowered. Women should be paid the same as men, etc. But I understand that there is a lot of society-wide confusion. And what does masculinity mean? And what do women want now? That there's a lot of confusion about that. So the fact that a lot of young men are reacting in this kind of negative way, that's true. All righty. Okay. the reason for Soviet interventions during the Cold War. Look, the Soviet Union was forced to intervene in many different countries because, Prague Spring, 1956, Hungary. The United States backed a fascist movement that seized control of the country. The United States backed this movement, and then the Soviet Union was forced to intervene and put them down. The Prague Spring, 1968. The United States was always trying to destabilize countries that were aligned with the Soviet Union. And in a lot of cases, they did it by kind of bribing the intelligentsia, the wealthier people. And so the Soviet Union was forced to move in. And yes, the way they portrayed Soviet military interventions on American TV, the way they portrayed them was with cold mechanical tanks. The tank became a big part of anti-Soviet propaganda. And because of that, the term tanky is now applied to hardline communists. All right. In the game Metal Wolf Chaos, the U.S. president is ousted by a coup, and his vice president. Clearly a situation of division of the rulers. I can't comment on that. Battle Cossack. I'm not familiar. Is that a famous video game? Is that a common video game that people play? I'm not familiar. Not familiar with that. Not familiar with that. All righty. Why did Henry Wallace turn into an anti-communist? I think the Korean War, McCarthyism kind of wore him down. He ran for president in 1948. He made a great contribution, but the Korean War, and he just he got worn down, I think, it got to the point that, and he was never a communist. He was never a full-on communist. He was a social democrat and a Rooseveltist who had pro-Soviet sentiments, but he was never a full communist. And I think that the tide of our society had shifted so much, and he was from one of these wealthier political families, and he cracked finally. That doesn't mean he didn't make a great contribution, but, you have to remember also the means of information back then. There were no, nowadays, even though RT isn't on TV, you can still look at the website and all of that. Back then, the means of information were very limited. Howard Fast, in his autobiography, talks about how he got a hotel room over Times Square, and he got a big, record player, and he blasted, pro North Korean messages during the Korean War through Times Square. But that was like the only place people ever heard them. People didn't have access to information. It was very hard to get literature and information from a pro-communist perspective, and, amid everything that was happening, and very harder. So I don't exactly get the joke here, Killian. I laughed very hard when I saw this, but did Earl Browder say you're going to be a dentist? I'm overthinking this, Killian. I'm probably just overthinking this, right? There is that classic claymation movie. I forget which one, where the subplot is that one of the elves of Santa Claus wants to be a dentist, right? And people make fun of it, right? It's become like a running joke. At least when I was a kid, it was a running joke because everyone had seen this corny claymation Christmas movie on television from the 70s. And there's this elf who goes, "I want to be a dentist." And everyone laughed about it. So I was bringing that up. I was referencing that in my analogy. But I don't know what it has to do with Earl Browder. What does it have to do with Earl Browder? Why is Earl Browder? How does he fit into this? If there's ever a communist who wanted to be a dentist, it would have been Earl Browder. Did he use that as an insult? No, that wasn't Earl Browder. Oh, now I get it. Okay. Wasn't Earl Browder. Now I get the reference, Killian. Thank you for clearing that up. No, that was Irving Howe. That was Irving Howe, the Trotskyite. Irving Howe, right, who was the Trotskyite who ended up working for the CIA. Irving Howe, all right. He was a Trotskyite, and during World War II, he ended up working with Irving Kristol, and he worked for the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And he was one of the famous, State Department socialists. And the story goes that he went to a college campus, and this is in it's in his autobiography, and it's in his Wikipedia page, I think, is that he went to a college campus in the 60s, and a Maoist was yelling at him. Some young Maoist was yelling at him, about, "Oh, you're a pro-imperialist, you're a fraud." And he said to him, "You know what you're going to be, kid? A dentist." And I read that insult, and I didn't get it. I still kind of don't get it. dentists, that's a respectable job, right? I mean, they make a lot of money. They clean teeth. Like I don't know. And that there's an element of classism there. See, New York City, there's an element of classism like, for example, right? One thing that I encountered here in New York City, which I did not encounter as much, right? But when I first came to New York City, whenever I'd be protesting, if there was like a Republican or a conservative, we would see you protesting for Occupy Wall Street or anti-war, they would walk by you and they would say, "Get a job." And I always wondered what that meant. Like, why would we not have jobs because we're unemployed? They would say, "Get a job." And I always wondered, and especially like I remember one time I was at a rally of transit workers. It was a labor union rally of transit workers. We're all protesting, and this like wealthy lady says, "Why don't you all get a job?" And it's like they're transit workers. Their signs say Transit Workers Union. But that's part of the New York City culture. Right. Another time I remember I was someplace. I think it was, it used to be, I think they stopped doing it, but maybe around COVID. I remember they have like this Halloween parade where like all the high school kids come in their Halloween costumes or whatever. So I was there and I was trying to sell communist newspapers to like, families and high school kids that are there for the Halloween parade. And I'm standing there by the subway stop and I've got my communist newspapers. I'm like, "Communist newspaper, get the latest issue." And this like teenage girl walks up to me and she's like, "Are you volunteering your time to sell that, or is that your job?" And I remember hearing that and thinking like she was clearly, because of the tone of her voice, she was trying to insult me, but I didn't understand the insult. Like, what if that was my job? Right? Would that make me a bad person? Well, in her mind, yes, right? Because she's rich, right? And the fact that you would be the kind of person that would sell a newspaper on the street means you're like a disgusting poor person. That's what she was saying. I didn't grow up with that. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and this kind of classist insult where you say to a group of people protesting, "Get a job," what they're saying is you're all homeless. You're homeless bums. That's why you're protesting. See, I didn't get that, right? Because it's like, right. And then the girl's like, "Is that your job to sell these newspapers?" And I was just like, why? How is that an insult? Like, what if it was, right? What if I got paid $15 an hour to walk around handing out the communist newspaper, right? Wouldn't that be a good thing to do? But, this is how like kind of very rich brats talk, right? That there's this feeling that if you have a low income job, you are a bad person. Right? You're a gross person, you're inferior, right? And that's very much part of like the Manhattan rich kid, lives by Central Park. That's the way they think, right? And that's new to me. I just didn't grow up around people who think that way. Vosh thinks that way, right? And that's very clear. If you listen to anything Vosh says, that's how he sees me. He sees me as an inferior working class person. Right. And that's, bread tube. I mean, thought slime, ContraPoints. That's how they all think. They're all like rich kids like that. Right. And, but it's a weird thing, but it's interesting. Like I wasn't used to that level of classism. I did have a high school teacher. I'll never forget this. Grew up in a small town. I had a high school teacher. And he lived in my little town, and, he had a nice sized house, and he had his own swimming pool in the backyard. So one time, one of the kids got wise with him and smarted off to him and said, "Well, you're rich, Mr. Hostetler." And he replied to them and he said, "Hey kid," he's like, "I'm rich for Orville, Ohio. Okay. But you ain't seen rich. Okay. I'm rich for this little town, but I am not rich." And I look back on that and I smile to myself because I'm like, he doesn't know how right he was. Like, yes, he was rich for my little town, my little tiny working class town in Ohio. Yes, he was rich enough that he owned his house, and then he had another lot with a nice swimming pool next to it. He was rich for Orville. But compared to New York City, he was not rich, right? He was not living by Central Park. He was not living in Long Island, It's weird how these things work. And then that kind of gets back to the whole thing that people say about anti-Semitism, about how anti-Semitism is kind of weaponization of resentment against the middle class, right? It's the stereotype of a Jew is that a Jew is a shopkeeper or a doctor or a lawyer. He's a middle class, and that's someone who has more money that you can see. And that anti-Semitism was kind of a method of weaponizing the resentment of the working class against the middle class because they can see them. But if you're in a little town like I grew up in, you're not going to see super rich people. You're just not going to see them. So if you're going to resent somebody for being rich, you're going to resent the guy who lives, a few streets over, who has a big house and a nice swimming pool next to it. You're going to think, well, he's rich. And compared to you, he might be, right? But he doesn't run the government, right? And that's anti-Semitism. Historically, it is, stereotypes about Jewish people that are stereotypes about the middle class. And it is kind of weaponizing the resentment of wage workers against store owners, lawyers, doctors, dentists. That's what anti-Semitism historically has been, because the stereotype of Jews is they're middle class. There were many Jewish factory workers, right? That every anti-Semitic trope that you've ever heard tends to be a kind of working class resentment against the middle class. I find that to be fascinating, right? If you talk about the roots of anti-Semitism, and that's why I would argue that wokeism is a lot like anti-Semitism, right? Because, you can't see Rockefeller, you can't see Bill Gates, but you can see the white person who's got it slightly better than you. You can see the man who's got slightly better than you. You can see the non-LGBT person. And that wokeism is about weaponizing people's resentment, not against the system, but against people who have quote unquote privilege, people who got it slightly better than them. And that is what anti-Semitism kind of is in its essence. If you look at the essence of anti-Semitism, it's weaponizing resentment, not against the system, but against other people in your life. Get you mad at people you can see, right? So there you go. I think that's fascinating. Very fascinating. But yes, Killian, now I get the reference. It was Irving Howe. And I still don't understand what he was saying. I still do not understand what he was saying. Why is, hey, kid, you're going to be a dentist? Why is that a way to insult a young Maoist? Some young kid, with his little red book ran up to Irving Howe, right? And he waved, you're a sellout pro-imperialist. And Irving Howe said, hey, kid, you know what you're going to be? You're going to be a dentist. How's that an insult? I don't get it. How is that an insult? How is that an insult? What if that kid had played with doll's teeth his whole life? What if he was the elf in the Santa Claus piece, right? And he was like, I want to be a dentist. And then Irving Howe said to him, you're going to be a dentist. And he's like, yes, I am going to be a dentist. All right, I'm being silly now. It's probably good I'm in a lighthearted mood. There's so many nights I get on here and I scream and yell and cry and stuff like that. And here I am telling jokes about dentists and stuff. So there we go. Good times. Good times. All righty. I haven't watched the speech, Carter. I haven't watched it. I should go and watch it. Right. I don't know my Reaganology very much. I know I'm paying for this microphone. I don't know my Reaganology enough to know about that 1964 speech. I'm sure it was an anti-communist, it was probably a Barry Goldwater kind of speech, but there you go. I'll have to go watch it, see how it fits in with the Yankee and Cowboy War. I will say that, it's been pointed out many times that, and John McCarthy points this out, that Reagan was like a Bircher. He was like a far-right populist, when he was running for president. And then, he compromised and that's kind of interesting. But anyway, all right. Okay. I can't comment on that. I'm not up on the situation in Ethiopia enough to comment on that. So thanks, Dan. Why is Cuba considered ML but not Venezuela? Because Cuba has had a classic ML revolution, right? That an ML party that was aligned with the Soviet Union took power and created a Soviet-style centrally planned economy. Whereas in Venezuela, they had an election. Hugo Chavez won the election, originally on a platform of neither socialism or capitalism, but then there was an attempted coup, which he defeated. And then after that coup, he began transitioning Venezuela to socialism, and it's multi-party state, and it's not a classic ML. It's not the Soviet system. That's why, right? It's not a one-party state. They don't have 5-year economic plans. They didn't, they didn't, nationalize everything. There's a lot of private property that's never been seized, and that it's not a Soviet-style revolution. Cuba, the economic system of Cuba was about the same, at least during the Cold War. It's changed since then. Now they're moving toward more of a Vietnam, China model. But during the Cold War, the Cuban political and economic system was about the same as North Korea's, about the same as Eastern Europe. They had the communist system. They had the commie-con pro-Soviet system. Now they've changed, and I think it's good that they've changed. They needed to change. They needed market reforms, and they're having difficulties there now, but they're doing a lot better than they were in the 90s. But Cuba did have a classic Marxist-Leninist communist revolution. Yes, sir, John, they were. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. They absolutely were. I think Reverend Sun Myung Moon was the president of WACL at one point, if I'm not mistaken. And that they were anti-communist activists, 70s and 80s. That's what they were. And they were, from what I understand, they were very family friendly and supportive of the Bush family at one point. I think Bush made a really big point of supporting them, the Washington Times, etc. No question about it. All righty. Is predictive programming a real thing in movies? I don't know what that is. Predictive programming. What is that? Theory that the government and higher-ups use fictional movies or books as a mass mind control tool. See, if you put it that way, it sounds bonkers. Okay? If you put it that way, it sounds bonkers. It's like they're sitting there in a room, in a smoke-filled room, and they're like, "Mwahaha, yes, we shall make a movie in order to," it sounds bonkers if you put it that way. And you're on the list, John. It sounds bonkers if you put it that way. But is it true that they use movies to nudge the public? Absolutely they do. Go and read Finks by Joel Whitney. They talk about how Hollywood studios, all of them had a CIA asset on the board, and they sat there and they very carefully went over movies to make sure that the political message was what they were in line with. Hollywood movies, a lot of them are sponsored by the Pentagon, and it's obvious in some cases. There was a James Bond movie that came out right after the Julian Assange thing where the villain was very obviously Julian Assange, looked like him, was a computer hacker, etc. And that there's many, many examples of this, right? Where they use movies to kind of nudge different political ideas and agendas. That there's no question about that. And that's acknowledged if you read The Cultural Cold War, if you read Finks by Joel Whitney, etc. However, what I just typed in, predictive programming, it sounds bonkers, right? It's like, yes, they sit there and, but no, I do believe they do. And that, advertising agencies do this. It's not a secret that for years, Big Tobacco paid Hollywood to have people smoke in movies, right? And that wasn't even about politics. That was just because they wanted to sell cigarettes. They paid a lot of money to have leading ladies in 1940s, 1950s Hollywood smoke cigarettes in movies because they wanted women to think cigarettes were sexy. That's not a conspiracy theory. So why wouldn't there also be a political undertone to some of this? Why wouldn't there be? Right? Of course there would be. So there you go. But if you call it predictive programming and you make it sound like there's a cabal and you make it sound like they're all on the same team, which they are not. They are definitely not. There are competing interests in Hollywood. You can be sure. Right. And a lot of the drama around Scientology is related to that. Tom Cruise, he's still a big deal in Hollywood. He can make movies and, but he's got big enemies. And Scientology and Scientology's enemies are battling each other in Hollywood. Not all of Hollywood is on the same team. There are many different interests there, etc. And this is what people need to understand. The problem with your general conspiracy logic is it makes it sound like all of the power structure are all on the same page. They all have the exact same agenda. They get together and they say, how can we oppress the normal average people? It doesn't work that way. There are competing agendas among the elite. And if they all had, if there was one group that had all the power, the world would be a lot more stable than it is, right? The problem is not that there's some secret cabal that controls everything. The problem is that while there are very rich people with different interests, none of them can bring stability because the system itself is out of control. So there you go. Non-biased book on World War II that are interesting. Is it true that the USSR originally worked with the Nazis? No. The USSR formed a global anti-fascist front. 1935, all the communists of the world were mobilized against fascism. Volunteers, communists went to Spain to fight against fascism and Franco. Communists led the Battle of Cable Street. Communists protested Nazis in the United States. Communists, when the first ship docked in New York's harbor with a swastika, communists jumped on the ship and ripped the swastika down. Bill Bailey, who was an American communist, they tried to deport him to Nazi Germany and extradite him for doing that. Communists were vocally anti-fascist. After a decade, after years of being anti-fascist activists, after the Soviet Union went around to every different Western capitalist country and wanted them to sign an anti-fascist, anti-Nazi pledge, and they wouldn't do it. At that point, after they had spent so much time trying to build a global anti-fascist alliance, and they hadn't gotten any traction, finally, in 1939, they signed a treaty, a non-aggression pact with the Nazis that basically drew a line down Europe, and the Soviet Union said, we won't move our soldiers to this side of the line, and the Nazis said, then we won't move our soldiers to this side of the line. It was not an alliance. It was just an agreement because they saw that World War II was coming. The Nazis were getting ready to fight with Britain and France and Germany, or in Britain and France and the other countries. And the Soviets were like, if we get into World War II now, we won't be ready. We won't have enough time for it. So the Soviets, out of desperation, they drew a line down Europe and they made a non-aggression treaty with the Nazis. And the Nazis broke it. It didn't last that long. It was a temporary agreement that was only made out of desperation because of the fact that the Western capitalist countries wouldn't do the same thing. And they had the absolute right to do it. And a lot of people will say they invaded Poland together. That's a lie. The Nazis invaded Poland. They overthrew the Polish government. And then the Soviets said, oh, that's, the line that they drew down the middle of Europe goes through Poland. So they moved their forces right up to the line. But the Polish government in exile never declared war on the Soviet Union. The Polish government fled. They fled to Britain, where they set up the Polish government in exile. They declared war on Nazi Germany. Never did they declare war on the Soviet Union. So if it had been a joint invasion, if the Soviet Union and the Nazis had invaded it together, the Polish government would have declared war on the Soviet Union. They didn't do that. So that's what you need to understand there. There was a temporary non-aggression pact at the beginning of World War II to buy time. After the communists had been mobilizing a global anti-fascist, Google the Battle of Cable Street, Google 1939 Madison Square Garden, Google the Seventh World Congress, read about the international brigades that went to fight fascism in Spain. No, the communists and the Nazis did not originally work together. That is a complete distortion of history. Eat the rich. How do you look past that resentment? Well, you can't build a movement based on resentment. Right? Jealousy, resentment, someone's got it better than me. I mean, at the end of the day, if that is your motivation, it's not going to end well. Right? And that even goes for interpersonal relations, right? If you work with somebody and you're like, damn it, this person has it better than me, it's still not going to go well. Jealousy, resentment never ends well. Wanting more for yourself, wanting to have a society where all have enough is a good way of looking at things. But whenever it becomes personal, this person has more than I do and they don't deserve it. Whenever it becomes that, you're heading in a negative direction. You want to avoid that at all costs. And in terms of a political movement, in terms of personal relations, jealousy, resentment is never good. The focus should be on abundance, creating wealth, making sure everyone has enough, advancing your own position, fulfilling your own potential, but you never want to make it about resentment, right? The vicious attacks that have been leveled against me are largely motivated by jealousy, right? And I mean, I don't want to get into too many specifics, but you can tell that in the things that people said, etc. Jealousy, resentment, that is a recipe for people hurting other people. It's a recipe for destruction. It's not good. It is not a good thing ever, right? And socialism is not jealousy, right? And that's a distortion, right? People think that socialists, we sit there, some people have more money than other people. It's not fair. No, capitalism is a highly irrational system that leads to poverty created by abundance. We want rational control of the means of production so that wealth can be unlimited. We want public ownership of the means of production. So there you go. It's important. We want people to control the means of production. We want to provide for all who need it, but it's not about resenting the rich because they have so much. It's about wanting everyone to have a decent life. And that's really important. You know, negative emotions or resentment against people for having too much, that is a recipe for disaster. Thank you. All righty. I think Hal was trying to say the Maoist kid was going through a phase and would become a normie. That's probably right, John. You're probably right. You're probably right about that. But there you go. Kudos to Killian for remembering that obscure anecdote, even if you got the name wrong. That's fine. Yeah, there you go. See, I didn't get it, but there you go. He was going through a phase and he would become a normie. You know, it's weird. I've met people that were in the NCM, and there seem to have been a lot of people that were in the 1970s New Communist movement who did just kind of become normal. And that's interesting to me. I have met people that were in the RCP, people that were in the October League, people that were in the Communist Workers' Party, who just are kind of normal people now. And I find it kind of odd. I don't know. I don't quite know what to make of it. I also get the idea that a lot of those groups were very controlling and authoritarian, and that a lot of times the people in some of the NCM groups, they didn't really have a full understanding of what they were doing. So maybe that's why they were able to just kind of turn it off and go back to being normal. Because they didn't really understand it. There was a lot of those Maoist groups in the 70s were very secretive. And there was a lot of, obey the leader, follow the leader kind of thing going on. One thing I will say that, when I was in Cleveland, I was in a certain communist group, and then I switched and I joined the Workers' World Party. And that certain communist group I had been in, there were a lot of people that were either kicked out or expelled that were my age or just slightly older than me. And so I would go to restaurants in Cleveland. Cleveland's a much smaller place than New York City. And I would see people that had been Maoist communists with me that were now just living normal lives. They were living biologically, right? That's I don't know, maybe that's cult language or whatever, but that's, the way that you talk about it, right? When people stop living a communist life, when they just, start just kind of living a normal average life, they're living biologically. They're biologically alive. They're not really alive because they're not involved in the revolution. And I would meet people that were slightly older than me that I had known as Maoist communists who were living biologically. And one thing I would notice about them was that they, as soon as I started talking to them about communism, something snapped in their head and suddenly they would just start. And I couldn't convince them to not think like the communist group they would have been in. And I just thought it was so odd, right? I would just be like, okay, you're no longer in this communist group. You're just living a normal life. So I'm trying to tell you about this other communist group. And then immediately, like, something clicks in their mind. And they're all like, well, that communist group is bad because of blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you're not in the other communist group. Why can't you just listen to me now? I always thought that was odd, right? And it's just like, you're not even in this other communist group. So why do you still believe everything they told you? The other thing that I thought was sad, and this one really kind of broke my heart, is that I would meet ex-communists, right? And their reason for being ex-communists was, I'm not good enough. And that one broke my heart. And I never want that to be the case, because that is a failure. I would meet these people. I'd be in a restaurant or I'd be walking down the street in Cleveland and I'd see somebody that I'd been in the communist group with. And so I would chat them up. I'd say, why aren't you doing communist stuff anymore? And they'd say, well, I'm not good enough. I just don't have the strength to do it anymore. I'm not, I couldn't sell newspapers well enough. I wasn't smart enough. I didn't understand the theory. I wasn't good enough to do it. That breaks my heart. What kind of organization is that? right? No one, and that was a really common reason I would meet for people quitting being communists, is they just felt they didn't feel up to it. And if you create an atmosphere, everyone should be able to make a contribution, right? And if you're building an organization that's making people feel inferior, making people feel like they're not good enough, that's a failure on the part of the communists. That's not that person's fault, No, that person wasn't not good enough, right? We're trying to build a mass movement of millions of people, and people voluntarily in this society go and join a communist group, and then they do it for a year or 2 years, and they're like, I'm just not good enough for this, and they quit. That sucks. That's not a reason. No one should ever quit a communist group because they think they're not good enough, right? Any communist group that has people quitting for that reason has really failed. That is a really that is a sad organization, because everyone has a contribution to make. Everyone has a contribution to make. I believe we should view everybody as being capable of making a contribution, and there shouldn't be anyone who's on the outside because they say, well, I joined this communist group, but they were all doing more activism. I just didn't have the energy to do the same amount of activism they did, so I quit. That come on. We can do better than that. We can do better than that, right? Yes, not everyone can be as active. Some people are good at some things, and some people are good at other things, but nobody should be leaving a communist group because they just say, I'm not good enough. Any communist group that makes you feel like, oh, the people in the group make me feel I'm inferior, that's not a good group. I'll just tell you that much. But the other thing I would notice, I've noticed that with older people too, right? I remember at Occupy Wall Street, there was this guy who used to come around, and he had a sign about like white privilege or something. And I would try to sell him Workers' World newspaper, and he would say, aren't you a Trotskyite? And I'd be like, wait, what? Because Workers' World historically has been a Trotskyite group, right? And I'd be like, what? This guy was like in his 70s, but when he was like in his 20s, he'd been in the Progressive Labor Party. And you talk to this guy, he was anti-communist. He was just some kind of weird hippie now. But when I tried to sell him Workers' World, he's like, you're a Trotskyite. Workers' World is a Trotskyite organization that is aligned with the revisionist Soviet Union. And it was weird because it's like he doesn't support Progressive Labor Party anymore. But it's like something clicks in his brain the second he sees me trying to sell him the other communist newspaper. And suddenly it's like he's in the Progressive Labor Party 50 years ago. And that is weird. I do not understand that one. That one perplexes me. And I've seen that a lot of people that were once in a communist group, and then they're living a normal life, and then you see them, and then you remind them of the communist group, and then all of a sudden something snaps in their brain, and they're talking at you like they're still in this other communist group. That weirds me out. That perplexes me. I don't know. Maybe it's like if you were a dentist, and then you became a bricklayer, and then you met another dentist, and all of a sudden, I don't know. That one perplexes me, right? That one perplexes me. But yeah, John had another super chat here. I think the term living biologically sounds like a criticism an idealist would make, not a materialist. You might be right, John. You might be right. To each their own. We don't want to be judgmental. You can't hate the masses of people, right? And that's what some of that stuff potentially leads to. If you start thinking that way, we're the good ones. We're the ones that are really alive. The masses are just a bunch of sheep. That leads to dangerous anti-populist thinking. The masses are the real heroes. That's what I always tell people to quote from the Little Red Book. The masses are the ones that'll do the real heroism in the revolution. We're just the people that have, the science and would offer the leadership to point them in the right direction. We have to view the masses as the real heroes. We have to be in awe of the masses. We have to love the masses of people. That's what you read. If you have a copy of the Little Red Book, I encourage everybody to go and read the chapter on the mass line, right? That is a very good chapter of the Little Red Book. Let me point you toward it. Chapter 11 of the Little Red Book. He talks about, the masses are the real heroes, right? And you have to love the masses of people. And you're right, John, that phrase living biologically, it potentially leads to contempt for the masses. And that's something we can't have. We can't have contempt for the masses, because if we have contempt for the masses, why should the masses follow us? Right? Why should they follow our leadership if we don't like them? If we think we're better than them, we view them as conforming sheep, we're only living biologically. Well, if we view them that way, they're not going to listen to us. So, that's an important point. That is an important point. Yeah, I mean, it is important, to celebrate the lifestyle of a revolutionary. That is important. So there you go. This is a Freedom Socialist Party of Seattle has been badgering me to join for months. If you know about them, are they worth any time? They're Trotskyites. Yeah, the Freedom Socialist Party was a split from the Socialist Workers Party, is led by Clara Fraser. And they're Trotskyites, but they have merged their Trotskyism with feminism. They're Trotskyite feminists, and they have their own party, the Freedom Socialist Party. I have a strong disagreement with them on international issues. They don't support Russia in Ukraine. They don't support modern China. They might be kind of friendly to Cuba or something like that, but they run a mass organization called Radical Women, which, does a lot of feminist activism. I remember I used to see they had a guy named Steve Durham who was running for president. And he was kind of a folksy older guy. He was very friendly. I used to see him around. But yeah, they're Trotskyites and they're feminists. And their activism that tends to focus on feminism, LGBT stuff. And because they're Trotskyites and because they're feminists, they're one of these groups that embeds itself in kind of the woke place, though they do have their own views, right? They do have their Trotskyist views. I used to have a couple of Clara Fraser's books. She's interesting, but yeah, they're a Trotskyite feminist party. So there you go. I hope that was helpful, Clove. I'm not trying to put them down. I'm just trying to make clear my differences with them. You asked me about them, and I said, well, I'm a hardline ML who's aligned with the existing socialist countries. They are a Trotskyite feminist organization. So obviously, in terms of emphasis and in terms of geopolitical positions, that we're going to be on different sides. So there you go. And on that note, I am going to put on the closing music. So it's been fun, folks. Tomorrow night, I have a great conversation coming up with an old friend. We'll be streaming on here. It's going to be a great conversation. So I'm very excited about it. That's going to be good. So looks like I'll be back tomorrow night. So see you soon. Upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.